Zoom. Enter your meeting ID, followed by pound.
Will, are we ready? It's 6:30. We have 42 people.
Yeah, I think so. I think it looks like we have quorum.
Okay, I can't tell, so I'm relying on you. Okay, I need to adjust the sound, and I will mute myself while I'm not speaking. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Land Use meeting of Community Board 8. It's actually, it's kind of a hybrid meeting because we have other items besides land use. But we're starting with the land use item. So the way land use works is that there will be a presentation by the applicant, and then we will begin. Oops, and there's still no video here. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Okay, there we go. So welcome to the land use meeting. It's a hybrid meeting, and we will start with the applicant, after which the public will have a chance to make any comments. You should raise your virtual hand, which is, if you look at and click on the participants button, you'll get a list of everyone participating, and under that is a raise hand button. So when I ask you to raise your hand, I don't mean your regular hand because I won't be able to see you if you're doing this. But if you raise your virtual hand, then Will and I will be able to see you. Will unmute you and you'll have a chance to speak. After the applicant, the public will have a chance, and then the full board, and then we'll move to some board items. And obviously the public is not only welcome, but encouraged to attend those. And for our last item, I will be calling on the public to participate, not so much for the second item. So thank you. And if the applicant is the applicant here, Will?
If you wouldn't mind raising your hand in the participants menu, if you're going to be speaking on behalf of the application. I'm trying to find Ryan, is that you? You may have to push a button to confirm unmuting.
Yes.
Is there anybody else who's going to be joining your presentation, or is it just you? Frank, are you also going to be presenting too?
Hi, yes. Hey, Will. Yes, I'll be doing the presentation. There's other members of the project team that are here that are available for questions, but I'll handle the presentation.
All right.
Okay.
Are you going to be sharing your screen, I assume?
I can, actually, I'm not sure if I can do that. I'm sorry, I'd sent over the presentation. If you give me a moment, I can just put that up on this screen.
I'm happy to do it as well. It just will speed up the process if you're in charge.
If you're able to do that, sorry, I hadn't actually thought about that. So if you're able to share your screen with the presentation, I'll run through it. If you wouldn't mind just advancing on, from slide to slide.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
All right. Does this look like what you're hoping to see?
That's the one. Yeah, it's a brief presentation, and then as I mentioned, there's a number of members of the project team on the video, and we're happy to answer any questions. So hello everyone. My name is Frank St. Joachim with Ackerman. We represent Barry's Boot Camp in this application to the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals, seeking a special permit to allow a gym use. It's called a PCE, or a physical culture establishment, at the site on East 86th Street. I'm joined by Adam Shane, the Chief Development Officer of Barry's, and members of the project architect, DXU, and also the sound consultant for the project is here to answer questions. So if you could just advance to the next slide. So here's an image of the site. This is what we're seeking here again is a special permit from the BSA for an approximately 72 or 7,300 square foot physical culture establishment, or PCE. This is going to be a gym, Barry's Boot Camp, on portions of the first and cellar floors of 237 through 241 East 86th Street in Manhattan. This is the former Leitner's Linen Space, as you can see from the image that was taken prior to that signage being removed. If you could go to the next slide. So just some context, the site, again, is located on East 86th Street. It's within a C2 8A commercial district where the PCE special permit is available. If you go to the next slide. And this is the tax map showing the site in the context of the block. Again, it's on the north side of East 86th Street, just west of 2nd Avenue. At the site, there's an 18-story mixed residential and commercial building, and the lot itself is about 9,400 square feet. If you could move to the next slide. This is an area map showing the land use context for the application. As you can see from the colors shown in the land use map, I'm not sure if you can see the legend, but essentially that pink color indicates mixed use, so commercial and residential buildings. Red is for commercial, blue is community facility. So as you can see, and you may be familiar with this stretch of East 86th Street, it has a very mixed use character, which we believe is appropriate for this proposed gym. If you could move to the next slide. And here's just some photographs showing the context of East 86th Street, the site itself, and then the lower photos showing some context along East 86th. We can go to the next slide. So here's the floor plan for the first floor. Again, the gym will be located on both the cellar and ground floor with a total of about 7,300 square feet. It's proposed to operate from 5:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Fridays, and 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. So on the first floor, the gym would have the main fitness studio, which is sort of on the left-hand portion of the screen, as well as a reception area, a fuel bar for snacks and water and things like that, and lockers on the first floor. We can move to the next slide. And then here's the cellar floor plan. You can see that on this floor, there's a flex lab, which would be able to accommodate stretching classes and then pre and post class stretching, as well as the locker rooms with showers. So that's the entirety of the gym space. I'll note that it's not open yet. It's still a proposed gym. We can move to the next slide. And we just have the few remaining slides are just with respect to the sound attenuation that's proposed for the inside of the gym. Here are several details of the walls showing the baffling and acoustic sound attenuation that would be built into the walls. And then if you could move to the next slide. Here you see just details of the isolated flooring, isolated ceiling, and some of the additional acoustic walls. And then if you could just move to the last slide. Finally, this is what the proposed signage would be on the exterior of the building. You can see on the corner, there's an elevation detail showing the signage that would be proposed for this Barry's Boot Camp. I'll note that Barry's is not a traditional gym where you just members go in and work out on equipment. It's class-based. So there'll be a schedule of classes throughout the day led by instructors. So in order to work out at Barry's, you either, you would attend a class for about an hour or so, work out and then leave. It's sort of different from a traditional gym in that respect. There's several locations throughout the city and actually throughout the world at this point. And we're excited, Barry's is excited to bring a location to East 86th Street. So I went through a lot of that quickly. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, as I mentioned, there's members of the team that can also answer more technical questions if I'm not able to.
Thank you. Okay, are there any questions? If any members of the public, please raise your virtual hand.
And again, for anybody on the phone, that's *9. And the participant menu is where you find the raise hand feature. And that should be at the bottom of your screen. Alita,
Okay.
We have one member of the public named Josh and then 2 board members.
Right, I see Josh. So why don't we go to Josh first?
Josh, you may have to push a button on your screen to unmute.
Hi, so I'm actually a resident of East 86th Street. I live 2 doors down. I was just curious how it's going to affect the noise and how people are going to be loitering outside of it and how that is being dealt with.
Sure. So there shouldn't be, as you saw in the detailed drawings, Barry's has put a lot of thought into this location with respect to sound attenuation. There's not anticipated to be noise emanating from within the gym, either within the building or to the exterior of the site. And Barry's also discourages loitering outside of their studios. There's ample space within the reception area. And as you can see, it's 2 floors. So that stretch lab provides a space for patrons that arrive early to a class, if they get there before a class ends, to congregate, stretch, so that there's not going to be loitering or assembly in front of the building. So I guess the answer is operationally, Barry's discourages that. And in terms of the space itself, it's designed such that we don't anticipate, Barry's doesn't anticipate an issue with it.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see anyone else from the public, so why don't we go to the board? Barbara Rudder. Will, would you unmute her?
Yeah, Josh re-raised his hand. I don't know if he muted himself.
Oh, okay. Let's go back to
Sorry
Josh
about
as a member of the
So
public.
just a follow up to that,
okay.
the sign, will the sign be illuminated?
Give me just 1 second.
Is there a slide I should go to, or?
We're actually on the slide. Yes, so there's 11, it's actually about 12 square foot illuminated sign,
Okay.
which would be compliant with the commercial sign regulations for the underlying zoning district.
Okay, huge fan, hoping to see it open soon.
Great to hear, thank you.
Anything, and before we move to the board, anything else, Josh?
He muted
I guess
himself
not.
back, so I assume not.
Okay, and I don't see his hand raised again. Okay, then let's go to Barbara Rudder. Would you unmute her? We'll go Barbara, Michelle, and Felice.
Barbara, you may have to push a button to confirm. Barbara.
I am.
There she goes. Okay.
Just a question just about, so there's no treadmill or anything like that. It's just classes, you said, and are the classes more general, like for all levels, or is boot camp strikes me as being the heavy hitters, or is it all level?
So let me clarify, there is equipment in the gym. So there's classes and Will, actually, if you wouldn't mind going back to that first floor plan, it should be around page, I think that's page 7. Oh, great, thank you. You got there before me. So there are treadmills as well as small benches for free weights. So they're the classes are a combination of work on the equipment and then work with free weights on the benches. And my understanding is that the classes focus on different body parts every day. So you could go in and do an arm workout or an upper body workout or a lower body workout. This is one of the gyms we represent that I actually haven't taken the classes for. I would say that I'm more in the beginner side, and I haven't taken one, so I can't comment on that. But I know that their policy is to be 100% inclusive and inviting, and I know they enjoy a very they're very popular in the city. So if that answers your question, that's
I'm a neighbor,
yeah.
and it's nice to have a store there. Thank you.
Oh, great. You should stop by and check it out.
Will.
Okay, let's go to Michelle. Will?
1 second. Michelle, you may have to.
Yep, I did. Okay, thank you. A couple of questions. How long is your lease?
Adam, do you mind fielding that question?
This is Adam Shane.
Please. Yes. Thanks, Will.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I can
Yeah.
hear you.
I also wanted to answer the former comment. We do our classes are based with treadmills and strength training. So it's interval training, and we have weights of all different types of weights. So you could use a 5-pound weight, or you could use a 25-pound or 50-pound weight. So it does allow for all levels of fitness to enter and go onto the treadmill or the floor. And if you do not want to run, we do offer spots on our floor where you could just do the strength training portion of the class. So we do accommodate people with injuries or people who don't want to run as well. And what was the next question? Our lease, we do long-term leases. So we do invest money, and we do want to be a long-term community member of the Upper East Side. So we do 10-year leases with 2 5-year options. So we typically are in our spaces for up to 20 years.
Okay, thank you. The reason I'm asking is, does granting this special permit change the use group for this location? And if so, does the use group revert to what it is now at the termination of your lease? Or does it change the use group of the property indefinitely? And the second part of that is, what does that new use group, if that's what you're creating, what other entities are permitted under it? So I can break that down again if you didn't remember everything I said.
Sure. I think I got the question, and it's actually a really good question. The special permit is unique in that it essentially it's as it's contemplated in the zoning resolution. A special permit allows certain uses if they meet the findings set forth in the zoning resolution. What this special permit would do would allow Barry's Boot Camp to operate this specific gym that's shown on the plans, if approved. Only Barry's Boot Camp, as the applicant, would be permitted to operate this specific gym, and any changes that were made or would need to be made would have to go back before the BSA for an amendment, and actually have to come back before the community board. So the special permit is not only limited to the applicant, but what's shown on the plans and any conditions that the Board of Standards and Appeals adds to an approval. Not only that, but special permits for gyms or PCEs are limited to a maximum term of 10 years. So at the conclusion of the 10-year term, Barry's would have to come back and apply for an extension of term to the BSA. If they didn't do that, and we're no longer operating at the space, anyone else that came into the space would have to apply for their own special permit or operate under an as of right use. Now, as far as the use group goes, the physical culture establishment, or PCE, is considered a use, but it's not under any specific use group. It's just a use that's only allowed pursuant to the 7336 special permit. So it's very limited in effect. Again, if this special permit were granted, it's only for berries and only for this specific space, which we're asking for, as shown on the plans that, you know, hopefully would ultimately get approved by BSA.
Okay, thank you. That was very
Thank you.
explanatory. Let me just ask one other question.
No, you know what, Michelle,
With
I'd
the
like
upper-
to, we
with
have,
the upper windows, I
Michelle.
want to know if you can see through, if we
Michelle,
can see the
excuse
people who
me.
are exercising.
Michelle, hang on, please, because we have a lot of people who have raised their hands, and I want to make sure they each have an opportunity to speak, and a lot of people. So I have two things. First, Will, could you find Josh again? I want to get, for the record, his name and address, as we ask all public members to give. And then I'd like to ask that no one call the question until everyone has had an opportunity to speak, please. So if anyone's raised their hand and intends to, well, ask for a resolution, actually, I'd like to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak before we get to that point. So Josh, wherever you are, could you raise your hand so Will could call on you and you could give your name and address, please?
Josh,
There you
you're
go.
muted.
Josh, 225 East 86th Street.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to Felice. Felice, Barry, and then Elizabeth.
Thanks. Just two questions. It's a little unclear. Is the second floor residential? So is this abutting directly residential space, or is it abutting a second floor of commercial space? Because as I read the materials, you're on the ground floor and the cellar floor. And then the second question, gyms have not been allowed to reopen in New York, and clearly you'll have some time will take to rebuild, to build out the space. But what are you doing to address what are probably going to be the longer term COVID-19 related health protocols that may be required for all gyms? How will that be incorporated into the space?
Sure. So to answer the first question, the second floor is entirely commercial. So there's a level of commercial use between the first and the third floor where residential use begins in the building. With respect to COVID-19 related precautions, I'll let Adam chime in a moment, but I'll just say that gyms won't be permitted to reopen until phase 4. Which is uncertain at this time, and the state has yet, and the city have yet to release specific guidelines related to gym reopenings. What we anticipate, and again, I'll let Adam chime in with specific details, but some form of limited capacity ventilation requirement for personal protective gear for patrons and instructors, and just intense cleaning like we're seeing in many other businesses, but without specific direction from state and local government. We don't know exactly what the details will be. I will note that it'll be some time before this gym opens. Fingers crossed that we'll be in a better place then with COVID-19. But with that, Adam, if there's anything specific that you wanted to add on, or if I've covered everything, let me know.
Sure. I'll shed light on what we've done. We have roughly 50 domestic studios, of which let's just say 10 are currently open in different parts of the country, including Los Angeles. And we are following pretty strict social distancing guidelines, which require people to be, minimum of 6 feet apart or more, depending on the local mandates. We do believe this will be 6 months of construction. So we have not started construction. So even if we started construction in August, the earliest we would be open is early 2021. So we are kind of, taking our time in that sense to allow New York City to kind of give us some what gyms are or are not allowed to do, including boutique fitness studios. But for the most part, in our current studios that we have reopened in this current environment, we have social distancing restrictions. We're running at about 20 to 25% capacity. We've upgraded all of our HVAC systems to filter out some of the bacteria and particles. That was very expensive, and we've invested that money to do so. So we will take every precaution and follow the governor's kind of lead, what he wants to see in fitness as New York City starts to investigate its reopening plan. All of that being said, we will not be open for a minimum of 6 months, more likely longer, as we wait to start construction to see if there is a reopening in sight. So we anticipate this studio to open early 2021, sometime during the first quarter. And we are obviously trying to be optimistic, but we will take every precaution and follow the mandates as needed.
Thank you. Rob, before we go to Barry, I just wanted to, if I can, tag along onto that question, which is, I read that the governor is investigating air conditioning systems and requiring different systems. Is that something that you're following? It sounds like it, but to confirm.
Actually, yeah, we are actually on the forefront. We are actually helping the government, kind of understand how HVAC and gyms, filter out air. So we actually are one of the few fitness companies that's gone public with upgrades to our HVAC air filtration, which includes hospital grade air filters and ionization and or UV lighting within the HVAC system that helps filter out air. So we are at the forefront of that, candidly, and that is part of our intent here. So when we open, in the event we are in COVID or even potentially out of COVID, we will have the latest and greatest kind of systems and technology in our HVAC. And if required more, we will do more.
Okay, thank you. Barry, Elizabeth, and then Peggy will.
And good evening. In full disclosure, while my name is Barry Schneider, my middle name is not Jim, it's Barry Schneider. So I distance myself from the applicant. However, I distance myself from the applicant in this regard. However, just less than 300 feet from my home is another Barry's gym on Barry's boot camp at the corner of 64th and 2nd Avenue. They've been there for several years now. They're a good neighbor. They don't have people congregating on the street corner. I know very well the people who live in the apartment above, and they have had no complaints regarding the presence of the gym there. So I strongly support this application, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
Elizabeth will.
Thank you, Alita. I'm just wondering if anybody can explain the background as to why PCEs require a special permit?
I'd be happy to explain that. In the late 70s, New York City was experiencing a lot of issues with commercial spaces really acting as fronts for drug and prostitution spaces. So the city, through zoning, enacted essentially a quality of life control to try and do away with brothels and other sort of houses of ill repute. So for the past, I guess since about 40 years, every gym and spa in New York City that qualifies as a physical cultural establishment has had to go through the process of obtaining the special permit. So the findings for the special permit are essentially require an applicant to undergo a Department of investigation to ensure that there's nothing in their background that would indicate that they intend to run a brothel at the space. There's been a lot of discussion about potentially removing the PCE special permit from the zoning resolution, but that's obviously in the city's court. There has been a number of zoning special districts, area-wide special districts, where the city has made PCE use as of right, but unfortunately it's not in place in this area unless we have to seek the special permit in order to have this use.
That's very
Thank you.
helpful. Thank you.
Hey, Peggy, Sharon, Anthony Cohn. Peggy, you're up.
Thank you. So a number of gyms have food they sell in some capacity at gyms. I'm just wondering if this new gym has plans to sell food in some capacity?
Adam, do you want to take that question?
Yes, absolutely. So we won't be doing cooking at all on site. We do have a fuel bar. That's part of
Excuse me,
that.
sorry.
That's okay. We do sell some prepackaged food like granola bars, protein bars, and things like that. But it's typically no more than that.
Okay, thank you.
I have my own background noise. Will, would you unmute Sharon and then Anthony, please? Thank you.
Sharon, you may have to push a button. There you go. We can hear you.
Sharon, you can go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. I'd like to call the question.
Well, we don't have a resolution.
Oh, okay. I'd like to.
But you know what? If you could you hold off on that, Sharon, and we'll get to you right after Elaine. Anthony and Elaine want to speak, so this way they can do that before you craft a resolution.
Okay.
It's just a little more difficult with the Zoom, as you know. Okay, would you unmute, and thank you for your patience. Would you unmute Anthony, Will?
Anthony.
Okay, I have a question and a comment, and the comment first. This is I think is a perfectly fine application, although I think it's a shame that the neighborhood is losing yet another dry retail establishment, but that's in a way neither here nor there. I was wondering if someone could explain wheelchair accessibility to the lower level, and then how, in the case of requiring an ambulance, how someone at the lower level can get upstairs in on a stretcher.
Sure. So there's an elevator providing access between the cellar and first floors. So I'll just take a step back and start by saying this site, the space is required and will be fully ADA accessible.
Mm-hmm.
So not only is there an elevator providing access, but all of the facilities meet ADA requirements in terms of the required width that's required. If you can see the sort of the shaded path through the space, that's showing that the minimum width is provided for accessibility for wheelchair use. And in addition to being compliant with fire egress requirements. As far as the stretcher goes, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I don't know if EMTs would take someone in a stretcher, and I presume they would just take them in the elevator. But I will just note that the space is compliant with all the ADA regulations. Okay. So
could you point out where the elevator is?
Sure. Let's see. How can I do that in the screen? There's essentially a.
It's not the building elevators for the residents.
Correct. Right? Yeah. There's a separate elevator.
Is that that guy? Okay, that Will is pointing at.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and Elaine?
Elaine?
Will?
Yep. Elaine, you may have to push a button. Elaine.
Elaine, you're still not unmuted. Is there something you need to click on?
I got
there
it.
you go. No, you got it. You got it.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to move, and I don't want to sidestep Sharon. that we approve this application. And I'd like to speak to it then.
Okay, well, you're the last one with a hand raised, so you can go ahead and speak to it. I hope, Sharon, that you are okay with that.
I think that the application was thorough, including the ADA. I think we welcome some activity on East 86th Street. I agree with Anthony. Other options would be nice, but given what we are facing, the one thing I would like to see that there is a commitment to cleaning their sidewalks and taking care of the trees, etc., in front of the building. And I'm hoping that they understand that that is part of being a community member, and I move that we support it.
I saw Michelle thumbs up a second, so.
Well, I'd like to just ask Frank about, and I appreciate seconding, about a commitment to do as Elaine suggested for being a good neighbor, which is taking care of the tree and cleaning up. And I'd also ask if I may, if I'm not violating anything, about the illuminated sign, to just be careful of illumination on the sidewalk for residences nearby.
Of course, these are all things that Barry's anticipated. In being a tenant in this building, between Barry's and the landlord for the building, these things would be addressed once they're up and operational. And as far as the sign goes, absolutely, yeah, this is something that the sign will be fully compliant with all the zoning and illumination requirements or limitations within this zoning district.
Okay, so then let's include that in the resolution. Did someone want to call the question? I see Barry has his hand up. Second, Rebecca. Okay, so the question is called. Do we have a secretary available to take the roll?
I believe that one of the three of them has said that they would do it if they would just raise. Thank you, Billy.
I see Billy. Okay, so we're going to do this instead of calling on everyone individually. We'll do it the way we've done it at full board meetings. If there is no objection, everyone who does not raise a hand will be presumed to vote yes. Anyone who wants to vote no or abstain or not vote for cause, please raise your virtual hand.
And for those on the phone, it's *9.
Billy has a hand up.
Yeah, so while we give people a chance to raise their hand, I'm moving into this building, and so just to avoid any perception of impropriety, I'm going to not vote for cause.
I don't think, honestly, having taken the COIP training last week, I don't think that's a not voting for cause issue. And the borough president likes to see people vote. You don't have a financial, unless your rent is contingent on having a gym in there. I don't know that, or some other business, I don't know that there's enough of a financial impact for you not to vote for cause.
I don't think so either, but my preference would be to not vote for cause. But if there's any sort of suggestion that I should feel compelled to vote, I'm happy to defer to you, Alita.
No, that's okay. I'm not going to stop you. I know that there's definitely a preference for voting, but if you're uncomfortable with voting and feel that there is a conflict, who am I to say you're wrong? So don't vote for cause. Just mark it down that way. Anyone
Okay.
else with a hand raised?
Thank
I
you.
don't see anybody. So Billy?
I don't see anyone else, so it looks like it's basically a unanimous vote in favor of the resolution with one not voting for cause.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much on behalf of Barry's boot camp, gentlemen, and we look forward to seeing you in the neighborhood and for you being good neighbors. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time. Take care.
Yeah, you're welcome, and you too. Okay, let's move. Will, you can take off the presentation. Thank you. Let's talk about what we started talking about at a previous full board meeting, which is the idea of having the virtual meeting versus in-person meeting. And this is all presuming that the governor will at some point make us go back to the open meetings law, lift the exemption. So let's just talk about what we'd like to do at that point. So who'd like to start? There were a lot of people who had their hands raised at the full board meeting. Am I seeing anybody? Okay, Sharon, lead us off.
You're unmuted,
You're unmuted, Sharon.
Hi. Oh, okay.
And then
All
Barbara
right.
Rutter. Okay.
Thank you very much, Alita. And also I'd like to thank the board as well for agreeing to continue this, this discussion. I initially raised this a couple months back during new business. And coincidentally, the following day, it was also raised at the end of the borough board meeting as well. And so Alita has had the opportunity to perhaps participate and hear several conversations on this already. So I pity you for that. Since I first raised this, I'd like to emphasize that I would like to see our virtual meetings continue at the very least through the end of December 2020, if not through the end of December 2021. And I have several reasons. First is that I don't believe that there will be a vaccine that will be available to the public that will address this pandemic that we're in right now. And I guess I should have prefaced all of my remarks. I should have prefaced my remarks by saying that it is because of, I'm making this request because of the pandemic that we're in right now. And also, because there won't be a publicly available vaccine, and also the difficulty with spacing issues, being socially distant from one another raises all sorts of complexities. And I'm not sure that, and I don't have a high degree of comfort with being able to socially distant from my colleagues as well as from the public who will attend. I think coupled with the fact that there are varying levels of adherence to wearing a mask. I mean, it's mandated, it's the law. I'm a strict mask wearer myself anytime I step out of the apartment, but I do recognize and I have seen that other individuals are choosing not to be as diligent as I am. I respect what, what their feelings are about masks, but I do believe that wearing masks helps prevent the spread of the virus. Also, I have found that there has been a high level of attendance for these virtual meetings. Yay! It's very important to have meetings in which it's really easy to participate in. And I believe that there are others like they are out there in terms of community board members as well as members of the public who believe the same as I do, that it's really easy to participate in this. The other issue is that having virtual meetings enable more parents to join us as well. There is less of a need for childcare, and you run into less childcare issues if you're able to participate virtually. And of course, I believe that it would be significantly easier for individuals who have disabilities or other issues or other mobility issues or immunity issues to enable them to participate from a safe space. With that, I want to emphasize that it is not an issue of making it it's to make it so easy, because the last time that when I raised this, there was significant pushback in the idea of doing video conferences in this way, and there seemed to be an emphasis on traveling to meetings. I am supporting a hybrid. If people want to travel to community board meetings, they should. For others who wish to participate virtually, they should. I'll end by saying that people who live on Roosevelt Island, the 3 or 4 that are now on the board, we have the longest commutes. And I've been doing this now for a while, but I want you to know that I have enjoyed and appreciated every single day that I have ever attended a community board meeting. Most of my colleagues on the board are home within 15 or 20 minutes. Before the 2nd Avenue subway, it would take me additional hour. The 2nd Avenue subway helps with shaving off 15 minutes of that. My preference is to attend community board meetings and to be present because I enjoy them. I enjoy being with my colleagues. I very much take very seriously the fact that I represent not only my community, but the Upper East Side community in general. However, I can't be so naive as to not recognize that we are in the midst of a pandemic. And you will forgive me if I add that this pandemic is not being handled very well. And my thinking is that it's could get worse before it possibly gets better. With that, I'll end there, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts, and that's it.
Thank you, Sharon. Whoops. Thank you, Sharon. There is a member from the public who has her hand raised, Wendy McCaver. If you would unmute her, Will. And is there anyone else from the public that would like to comment on the nature of full board meetings, whether they should be virtual or hybrid or only in person once the restriction is lifted? Okay, Wendy, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for letting me speak. And I really appreciated the remarks of Ms. Pope-Marshall. I want to make sure that when it is safe to do so, that we are able to have an in-person option always available. And I do think that a hybrid meeting is certainly feasible. I know that at the Blood Center, there's a drop-down screen that works with a smart board so that anybody can be up on the smart board just as if they were at a Zoom meeting and participate that way. We cannot overlook the fact that when you are at a personal meeting, when you're in person, there is the opportunity to connect with other people, to truly be a community, whether it's in the audience or people who've been speaking, to have aside conversations, to make connections and to work out problems. However, I also want to say that I hate to confess I'm a senior, but I'm a senior and I am staying at home as much as possible because of the pandemic. And I very much respect the remarks of Ms. Pope-Marshall because we don't have a vaccine. I don't care what's promised. I haven't seen it yet. That's really not where the science is. And I think that we need to be safe. I am so grateful to all of the CB8 members who have really devoted their time and their energy and their mental energy to making these meetings work. And I really want to thank you for that. So as long as there is this health risk, no matter what officials are saying, I mean, when schools really can open, I think that's an indication that perhaps we're safer, not necessarily what the president is saying, but you know, on a more local level, when we see that we're really safe, that might be a time to open up the meetings in person again with that hybrid option. But I don't want to see that there is no ability to have in-person meetings forever. That would be very deleterious to the community. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Let's go to Barbara Rudder. I saw her hand up here earlier. I was trying to, where are we? Barbara, and then Vanessa, and then Felice. And I would ask if, and I appreciate that there are a lot of thought that goes into comments. I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak, and that we're also able to get to the last item on the agenda. So I'd ask if you could keep comments to 3 minutes. I don't want to time you, colleagues of mine, but to ask you just to use your good judgment. Barbara, Vanessa, and Felice.
Thank you.
Barbara
I agree
first.
generally with what everybody said. I would like to just clarify a little bit with Sharon. I think we're talking about 2 issues. One is pre-total cure, and the other is post. I don't think we can say that anybody would feel totally comfortable with having face-to-face meetings until we really know that we're totally safe. The open meeting laws mean that people are there. We can't limit, we can't say you can't come. So I certainly think, and what I would disagree with Sharon, if I may, is to give any time. We do not know if it's December or January of 2025 or something like that. We hope not. I do think that we did see in this new normal some benefit to having a virtual for people that are really not able to do it. I think the attendance has been good because we really don't have much else to do. I didn't miss the meeting I was expecting because I didn't have my vacation to go on, and I don't think anybody has a conflict with theater tickets at this point. So I do think that we're in a stage where we have more buy-in than we will in others, but it certainly does open up the ability for people to be able to do it. There is nothing like face-to-face. I've been, my work was doing training on a big system very often, and doing it over the phone or video never took the place of looking at somebody's eyeballs and face-to-face and having the camaraderie. But I'm very much for, as Wendy had said, a mixed hybrid when we do it, with an encouragement that we community board people do in fact show up unless there's a real reason not to. And
Thank you.
No hard date about when we should start in terms of safety. Because Sharon, we do not know when that's going to be, unfortunately. I wish we did.
Thank you. Vanessa?
Hi. To save some time, I will share that I agree wholeheartedly with Sharon's comments. And I also agree with what Barbara added about timeline, that if we are going to offer any type of guidance in a resolution of what we think the sort of governor's open meeting laws should look like, or what the future should look like, potentially focusing on metrics instead of dates would be a more productive use of our time. I also want to address, in the last meeting when we discussed this, there were a few concerns about the productivity or discipline that can be accomplished via virtual meetings. And I want to really encourage all of us not to conflate in-person physical participation with actual participation and attention and discipline. There are plenty of times when we can be in person and not physically, or be physically present, but not mentally present and engaged in the conversation. And I personally work for an organization that is nationwide, that has 1,000+ people working all across the country. And when you hold yourself to higher expectations of digital meetings and participation, you can be just as productive. I understand it's not the same. It's not the same as face-to-face, but if what we're concerned about is discipline of board members or participation, then that is a separate issue that we can address by having a conversation and agreeing to norms and expectations and holding ourselves to those expectations regarding our virtual participation. So I just want to make sure that we're pulling those two separate concerns apart and not conflating that just because we have virtual participation that we can't be disciplined, that we can't be collaborative, that we can't be engaged and have full participation at the same rates, if not better than if we were all in person. And I think these are just two separate issues. And I'm happy to work with anyone should we get to the point where we want to sort of set some clear or evaluate the norms that we're setting for our group, so we can ensure that we're really being as participatory and disciplined and engaged as possible.
Thank you. You raise an interesting question about setting up norms for participation. I mean, to make sure that people are disciplined and actually engaged. Felice, thank you, Vanessa. Felice? Will? Thank you.
Just briefly, I think having the ability to have virtual meetings or have a hybrid when we're allowed to meet in person really does encourage greater participation from the community. And so I would encourage, however we move forward in the future when we're permitted to meet in person, that we continue to have a virtual option for people to participate. I think the requirement to have 6 feet of social distancing will really substantially limit the capacity of the New York Blood Center. And before we even think about being able to return in person whenever we're allowed to by the open meeting law, that we really need to be able to figure out what that does in terms of capacity and whether or not that limits additional participation of people attending, because I think it will be a substantial restriction.
Thank you. That's a really good point. I'd just like to point out that it's not that we're permitted to have in-person meetings, it's that the open meetings law requires that we have in-person meetings, which is why the governor lifted that requirement during this pandemic. Thank you, Felice. Lori and then Chuck.
Well, I'm sure that it won't surprise anyone that I am a very big believer in virtual meetings. I think that it has, for all the reasons that were stated by Sharon, that the attendance is better, that it's easier for parents, that it's easier for the disabled. And, I certainly don't feel a distance with you all. And, so I just don't think that that's an issue. So I would very much support always being able to do virtual meetings. The one thing that I'm concerned about is that when you talk about hybrids, that I think is problematic in that if you have some people who are participating virtually and some people who are participating in person at the same meeting, I think that sets up a dynamic that is totally different between the two groups. So what I would propose is that if you want to go back to all, the open meetings laws or whatever, if that, comes down the pike, that we should alternate having a total in-person meeting and then a total virtual meeting. I having both at the same time, I think is problematic. That's it.
Thank you, Lori. Okay, Chuck and then Wilma. You know what? There were some members of the public, but because of the nature of this and the way virtual meetings, I can't see who everyone is without scrolling up and down continuously. And there are a whole lot of people who have raised their hands even since you finished, Lori. So I'd like to be able, before we go back to the board, if you would bear with me and allow switching back and forth to the members of the public who've raised their hands. And so I'm going to put you on hold for a second, Chuck and Wilma. I'd like to go to Andrew Ravascare and Betty Cooper Wallerstein and John's iPhone, whoever you are, John. And except I'm going to ask you, because I don't want to bifurcate this like this, if everyone could just keep their comments. Now I'm asking everyone to just 2 minutes, if we could do that. Again, because there are a lot of people who've raised their hands. So let's go to you, Andrew, and then Betty, and then John.
Hi,
hope you know
Alita.
who you
Thank
are,
you for
John.
letting me.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi, thank you for letting me participate in this discussion. I think one of the key important factors that comes with the open meeting law is that we are better able to find consensus when there's an audience that is either cheering or clapping or disagreeing. It's a little hard to do that on the Zoom because in our chat, I know for me, I'm only able to message Will, which is lovely, but it's not a totally open group discussion. So I would be in favor of a hybrid model in the future because that allows both consensus that you get when you are in person, which provides us with information on a variety of issues. But I also hear what others are saying regarding online availability. Under the current pause of the open meetings law, I think, and I could be mistaken, that there's a stipulation that we should be getting the transcript of these meetings and/or the chat. Is that currently happening? And if so, where can the public find it? Thank you.
It just says that it must be made available upon request. So if there's a request, we will make it available.
And so would that just be emailed to anyone who expresses interest, or would it be on the CB8 website?
That would, where would the transcript be? Is that what your question was?
Yes.
It'd be posted just like our minutes are posted. On the
Okay,
CB8 website.
Is there also a way to open up the chat so that we could have greater cross dialogue during these meetings?
Not particularly without it being a distraction.
Yeah, we can't have the chat open. It all gets recorded. It's impossible for people to see it, and that's utterly distracting. So we can't use the chat as another form of dialogue in the same way that during the in-person meetings, I can't have anybody text me. I don't even bring my phone up. I use Will's phone purely to time. So it just wouldn't work in terms of ensuring attention or anything else. And that's why the public is invited to participate, and the meetings can go on for a while to enable everyone to speak who wants to. So thank you, Andrew. Betty?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I just, I had assumed that the question had to do with when we will no longer need to be doing this virtually, because I think it's very important for people to be present. There were a lot of people last time with the schools, board presidents, et cetera, who did not have a chance to speak. But a couple of them said they were so impressed with the board and they had never gone to a board meeting. I think it is important. The board does a good job, and I think it is important that we have our meetings as we've always had. This is very convenient for everyone doing this way, but it doesn't really give people the really good information about how the board works, and whether those people who would not have had a chance to speak if they were at the open meeting, but they would have sat there with their friends, they would have asked someone else if they would get called on to mention something that they wanted. I think it's very, very important for the board to have the meetings where people will come, and of course the meetings will be shorter, and that's good too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Betty. I keep muting my phone for my loud background noise. Okay, there's John's iPhone.
Yeah, my name's John McClement. I've been attending board
could you
meetings.
just state where you live? I'm sorry,
I'm-
I should have asked everyone from the public.
Okay.
Please just chat, Will, with your address.
I live at 415 East 85th Street between First and York
Thank you.
Avenues. I've been attending board meetings in person and now virtually for the last couple of years. And I think they're wonderful the problem I've had recently, and I know this, maybe this just comes with the territory with the virtual meetings, but certainly I think an argument for going back as quickly as possible to in-person meetings is the length of time. I mean, I think there's kind of a feeling that, well, we're virtual, we can just keep on going. Everyone's at home and they're reasonably comfortable. I found it extremely frustrating. I mean, I finally, sensing that it was over, bowed out around 10 after 10, only to learn that it just went on for another hour or so and issues were discussed that I would have liked to have heard about. So I guess I'm just arguing for more discipline as long as we have these virtual meetings in keeping them moving and not having them go on all night. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm well aware of that, and we are working on it too. And it fluctuates with the number of issues and how controversial they are, and other people may differ, but I like to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. I appreciate when comments are succinct and non-repetitive. So thank you so much, and for also giving your information. Last chance, anyone from the public? Okay, with all of that, let's go to you, Chuck, and then Wilma. Will?
Chuck?
Okay, am I unmuted here?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Let me just make the point. We were having this discussion. The point is that the open meetings law is the law. It's been suspended by the governor during this pandemic. He's not going to take the suspension off until we're past the pandemic. And then once we get to that point, we will have to go back to regular meetings, in-person meetings. And in order to do anything else, we'd have to get that amended by the legislature, and he'd have to agree to it. And I agree with Betty and John. I think the open meetings law is there for a purpose. I think it served us well, and I think there's a lot to be said for in-person meetings. And I think it would be very difficult to get the legislature to come up with some kind of a hybrid scheme where you would go back to virtual meetings. So I think. I don't think much is going to come of it. So we can discuss it, but I don't think it's going to amount to much. The law is the law and will remain the law.
Also, apparently, happy birthday, Chuck.
Oh, is it your birthday, Chuck? Where's the cake? Happy birthday. I'll spare you from my singing. That'll be my birthday gift to you.
It was my birthday, July 4th.
Oh.
So we always try and ask legislators and the mayor, for instance, the governor, to take certain steps. So I leave it to the board. But thank you for raising that, because you're quite right. There is a law. Wilma?
Good evening. Thank you for taking my. I would like to make a comment on what the last speaker said about legislation to make that a law is a law, and we haven't enough time, it seems, to try to work on making this law so that when we can't find a spot to have our meetings, because it's getting harder and harder to find a space big enough to accommodate the board and the and everybody else, maybe once every 2 months or every other month or every 3 months, they can have a virtual meeting. I think it's important for future. And I had said this before, because of the lack of places at times that we don't have. If we have a time where, well, we know 3 months from now we're going to be able to have a virtual meeting, we don't have to worry about that particular month. So maybe that's something to think about for future. Not all the time having meetings like this, because I really enjoy seeing people face to face. And but I think that it's time. We have a lot of time. Maybe it doesn't seem like this. We're gonna have a vaccine anytime soon. Maybe we can work on changing that so that maybe once in a while we can have a virtual meeting.
Thank you. That's an interesting point that no one else has raised yet. Adam, and then Lowell and Elizabeth. Will, Adam, please.
Can you hear me?
Adam, you're on.
Can you hear me? I agree with a lot of what Sharon said. I thought it was wonderful. Although I do disagree on one point. I think she has a little more respect or tolerance for people who don't wear their masks, because I have little respect for people who don't wear their masks. I also don't think that a hybrid model really makes sense. I think that that's like a tale of two cities thing. You're going to have a bunch of people who are maybe have comorbidities, who are concerned about their health, or of a certain demographic or age, who are going to be sitting home, and then you'll have a bunch of other people coming together. I don't think a hybrid model makes any sense. I mean, I also think that we shouldn't be discussing new, in-person meetings for a while. I don't think it really makes sense. Alita and I had some curt discussion about, I didn't think we should have the March meeting when we had the March meeting. I mean, I was up in arms, and Alita and Russell were kind of disagreeing with me a little bit, but I love to say I told you so, but I told you so. I was like, we should not have had that. We should not have had that March meeting. And I don't see how we can really, in earnest, be discussing about a meeting in October, November, December. I just don't see how it's realistic. And I don't see a hybrid as being realistic either. So that's my 2 cents.
I just have to respond to that. I think while the writing might have been on the wall, we certainly had no idea. There was a lack of leadership, and the idea of having people meet in person obviously resonates with a lot of people. So yes, in retrospect, we should have locked down at the end of February probably. But moving forward, now we have a lot more information and a lot more knowledge about how the virus spreads. So I think people, rightfully so, should be a whole lot more cautious about all of that. But thank you, Adam. Lowell, you're unmuted.
Hi, Paul. Yeah, I just want to say real quick that, if we have the technology and it's legal, we should have our members be able to go virtual. It seems to work. We're all vetted by our councilman, our borough president, and our peers. But as far as the public, I don't think so. I could see often there's a hot topic where a developer or someone else or a lobby may stack the room with people to speak on it, and virtually that could go on for a long time, and we don't know where if the person's calling from Upper East Side or Texas. So that's what I'm against.
That's an interesting point too that people haven't brought up. Thank you. It's so enlightening to listen to everyone and to see how engaged you all are, because more and more people are wanting to participate. So Elizabeth and Tricia and Rita. Elizabeth,
Thanks,
you're unmuted.
So a couple things. First is, I don't think we need to worry about when this period starts or ends. Phase 4 only allows gatherings of up to 50 people. So clearly a community board meeting, an open law covered meeting, can't even be contemplated until we are beyond the end of phase 4 and are in a world in which there can be unlimited attendance at one of our meetings. What we do have is the opportunity to really think about, with new technology that was not contemplated when open meetings law was developed, and that certainly was not contemplated when the community board process was developed. This is now an opportunity that potentially removes barriers for community participation. And I think we are clearly in a moment in time where a very big focus is on how can we remove barriers from participation. So I would like to sort of see if there is interest on the board in developing a set of recommendations that could be brought to the borough president, towards the notion of, in this new world of technology that was, that fundamentally changes the capabilities and capacities of meetings, what should an open meeting look like in the future, inclusive of what are norms and expectations of board members in terms of in-person versus virtual participation. This is a very different world, and one of the things that we can benefit from this experience is how do we use this experience to move forward and create greater access on a long-term basis. And one small point I have personally participated in community board meetings when there were too many speakers for everybody to be heard. They were known hot topics, topic specific events, and there was a capacity constraint. There was a time limit there for both individual speakers and for the meeting overall. So I don't think that being virtual absolutely requires that every single person necessarily be heard. But that's the kind of thing that might go into a set of recommendations for how to leverage technology to remove barriers of participation in the future, even after we're able to have gatherings of unlimited numbers of people.
Thank you. Tricia?
Hi.
You're unmuted.
Great. I don't want to take up too much time, so I agree with a lot of what other people have said. I really do like Elizabeth Rowe's idea of taking this as an opportunity to come up with some best practices or suggestions for how this might work long term. I'm very supportive of a hybrid model. I just wanted to add that when thinking about what I miss most about in-person meetings, it is that interaction and those conversations with my colleagues. I rely on a lot of their expertise and experience in shaping my own views on certain topics. So I do actually wish that there was a way, while I understand and appreciate, Alita, your thoughts on not opening up the chat to discussion during these Zoom meetings. I wish that we could think creatively about some other ways that we might be able to casually connect with each other. I would argue that most of my conversations that I had with my colleagues in our in-person meetings was casual, but all very informative and helped me shape my perspective on things. I rely on Jane and on Barry and Barbara and so many others on how their perspective on this is, and a quick word beforehand or clarification on something if I have a question. So I wish that there were a way that we could instill some of that. That's what I do miss, and I do wish that there was a better way to do that. So not really a suggestion as much as just posing questions, but I do think that the idea of coming up with some best practices and things that worked and things that could be fixed or improved upon is a good idea.
I agree with you, Tricia, but I know you can't possibly sit next to all of the people that you mentioned, and that's a problem from where I sit about the virtual meetings, is not being able to see where people are. I mean, it's not from my position here, but in sitting where anyone else is, that you can't turn around, you can't see how someone else is responding. With respect to the chats are all public because they're being recorded. And so the ability to really have a conversation with someone would be somewhat, I think, limited by that. And then it's just not meant to be used in that way for these meetings. And and I'm not sure how it all fits in with the public meetings law, but you're absolutely right. This is a chance to be creative, and that personal interaction before meetings, after meetings, is really lost in this virtual sense. And there's no sense of the temperature, the overall temperature in the room. Does people seem to be excited by an application or an idea or an objection? There's no way to tell from this or at all. And I think that for me, that's, as a person, that's really lacking in this. But I should keep probably my comments to myself since I haven't raised my hand. So Rita and Craig and Valerie, Will, would you unmute? Did you have anything else to add, Tricia, before we go away from you?
I just muted her, so I hope
Okay, then never mind. Rita, you're unmuted.
Rita, you have to push a button to confirm. Rita, we can't hear you yet. There may be a button at the bottom of your screen.
You're still muted, Rita.
There you go.
How's that?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Better.
You know, the community board is the community board, and now people have gotten a taste of that. It could be two things. It could be virtual or it could be in person. The in-person board is very critical to being able to talk to other people who you don't get a chance to talk to. I just want to say that I think that we should keep virtual meetings until the vaccine has been tested. And the other thing is that several of us have to take public transportation to the meeting, and we're really trying to stay off that as long as possible. So I hope everybody stays well for as long as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Okay, Craig, and then Valerie, would you unmute Craig? Craig, you're unmuted.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I think we can all agree that an in-person meeting is the gold standard, and we all ideally will want to be in person whenever that is possible. So I think this discussion should really be about how do we accommodate those who are unable to participate while there are barriers, and address some of the barriers that may prevent some people from doing it in person at a time where we are able to meet. So talking about not only just this current COVID-19 environment, but beyond that. So for example, if someone is under the weather, we're all much more sensitive towards spreading germs. And even when this whole crisis is over, hopefully we'll all have learned our lessons that if anyone's feeling sick, they just stay home. And sometimes we all want to be there. We're all invested in the community board and we all want to participate. But should we be at an in-person meeting if we're not feeling 100%? A hybrid format would work. Same if someone has a childcare issue and can't find a babysitter or needs to be able to be home for some other family situation, but otherwise would be at a meeting. So that's one piece of it. The second thing, and this is where I'm a little confused right now, is can we do it now if the open meetings law was reinstated? Because as I'm reading the open meetings law, it talks about video conferencing in there to conduct meetings. And the rule basically is that a public body that uses video conferencing shall provide an opportunity for the public to attend, listen, and observe at any site at which a member participates. So I'm not a lawyer, but to me that suggests that perhaps maybe there are accommodations in there that would allow us, as long as we have a meeting location in place, a physical location, that we in theory would be able to have meetings that are of a hybrid format. That being said, I think it's really important, as a number of people have said, that if we are to go that route, that we have ways to, that we really thought this through and have the ability to make sure that this isn't going to get out of control. So I say this after our transportation meeting last week went till 11 o'clock, 4.5 hours. And part of that was because we had great participation and we felt it was very important to make sure, both Chuck and I, that everyone who wished to speak and participate from the public did so. And that becomes a real challenge. And I think we'd have to work through the issues of how do we make sure that we allow the public to participate if they are participating remotely, but in a way where it doesn't slow things down. And then of course, there are the logistical concerns of making sure that if we are at a physical location with a meeting, let's say the blood center, do we have the ability to actually stream the meeting? If you have a single chairperson at a meeting, are they going to be able to do it? Do we need to rely on CB8 staff to be able to assist with the logistics of running an online meeting and doing what Will does? Because poor Will, if he had to attend every meeting in person, I would hate to have to put him through that. And how would we make sure that we can, if the point of this would be to get the public to be able to participate and members to be able to vote, to make sure that we had mechanisms in place to allow both things to happen without causing meetings to go till all hours of the evening. So that's really where I am right now. And I'd love it if someone were able to clarify, based on their understanding of the open meetings law, whether this is permissible, because as Chuck said, the law is the law, but whatever it is, if we are able to do it, then I think we should definitely try to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If anyone wants to respond to Craig's question about the open meetings law, just raise your hand and you'll be at the end of the pile, because there's no way of differentiating and no way to ask people to lower their hands. So thank you. And I've always appreciated how inclusive your meetings are, because you do allow everyone to speak.
If you don't mind, Adele has actually spoken to us about that in the past, and because we had talked about the idea of using just a conference call line, and she said that everywhere that a person had been calling from would need to be posted as a place that somebody could go to be a part of that conversation. So your interpretation was correct.
Okay. Okay. Craig, did you have anything to quickly say in response, or?
No, in the interpretation meaning that if anyone participates from their own home, that becomes a public location. Is that the interpretation?
It would
or
need
that
to
you
be
just you need a single location listed on a public notice saying this is the physical location, and otherwise you call in.
No, she has said, and maybe she had a very conservative view of the interpretation, but that every place that somebody was calling from had to be open to the public.
Okay. I know, and this is from past experience in other locales, like when I was working in Connecticut, their open meetings law required you to have a physical location for the meeting, and otherwise you could, so anyone who wishes to show up could, otherwise you can call in and no one can be there in person otherwise. So I guess if it's a matter of confirming that that is the interpretation that the state is using, that would be perhaps maybe a follow-up question to ask. And maybe the interpretation's changed in this current environment as people are looking ahead.
And again, I was just citing the conversation, the presentation that Adele Bartlett, the general counsel for the Manhattan Borough President, gave. I'm not purporting to be an expert beyond her. I'm just giving what her advice previously was to our board.
And in any event, the borough president believes that we would need to, that this a hybrid meeting would not be permissible under the open meetings law as it currently exists.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to Valerie and Rebecca Dangor, and then Michelle.
Hi,
Michelle,
everybody.
you have, okay. I'm sorry, Valerie.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think, just going back to Adele Bartlett, when she said about open meetings law, the key words, Craig, that you read or stated were that you can participate, you can observe. And that's why the live streaming works, because it doesn't violate the open meetings, because all you're doing is giving the public an opportunity to observe. And so that doesn't violate the open meetings law. I just think in this whole conversation, we forgot about the fact that we've been live streaming a lot of our meetings. And I think, I personally don't think that the hybrid really works. And I don't think that, I mean, it's great that we have all these people dialing in on various nights, but I think the opportunity, the meeting, we're there to listen to the public, but the meeting is actually between the community board, among the community board. And that's better, best practice is to have that be an in-person meeting. I mean, I'm not talking about we're in a time of COVID and obviously the governor has suspended the rule and we're doing it this way, but the optimum way to get the best result is to all be in the same place at the same time, to be reacting to all, and to be in the same circumstance and feeling the same pressures, etc. And you miss all of that when you're in a virtual meeting. When we're at our meetings and people come in, sometimes we make the decision that we're not going to hear from every single person who's on one side of the issue. We take a show of hands, or we talk to whoever has brought their people, and we allow them to express the views on behalf of those people. And then they clap, and we know how many people are there. We can tell. I think it's important once we're beyond COVID, and hopefully that's sooner rather than later in 2021, that we use all the information that we've gathered from people signing in, make sure that they still maintain their connection to the community board, give them the opportunity to observe through Facebook, but at the same time, show up for things that they feel passionate about in person. And while I think it's, important to hear from everyone, we get the message that, certain buildings didn't want a street closed. And, we can hear from everyone, but it doesn't really move the issue along. And we get, we can tell when we're in person better who, what are the different points of view. And I think it's easier to conduct the meeting to see in the room to make sure we get a balance of opinions when we're talking, like this on right now. I'm on a telephone and I'm streaming through to see everybody's faces to see who's there and who's not there. It's more disjointed, and I think is not in the spirit of how these community meetings are supposed to be run. So I guess I go back to Betty and to Chuck and to say, the best of all possible worlds is an in-person meeting where we can evaluate all the people who have come and to speak out on an issue. But I think it's important for the community board to have the live streaming option so that people actually know that we exist. I mean, it was interesting at the transportation committee meeting to hear people talk about how they never gone to one or whatever. And in my opinion, even though they participated virtually, they still haven't been to a community board meeting. And that could be a better or worse, but in any event, it's not the same thing. And I'm looking forward to be able to be in the room with everyone I know and everyone I don't know to evaluate issues in the way that they are supposed to be evaluated, whether it's a community board level, whether it's at the House of Representatives, whether it's at the City Council public hearing, an MTA public hearing. In-person meetings are the best. I do think, though, that in this way, that there does have to be some special accommodations for people who do need to speak on issues who, for whatever reason, can't be there to make it. But I'm more in favor of continuing the live stream and bringing it back to all in the same place meeting. So thank you, and stay safe for next month.
Thank you, Valerie. Okay, Rebecca Dangor and then Michelle Birnbaum.
Hi, I think there are two different issues here. One is during the time of COVID, and the other is after. I think during this time, everyone understands the vital importance of virtual meetings, but we also have to understand that in the future, there is a digital divide, and I would be extremely uncomfortable when we're all in the clear to continue only virtual meetings, especially since there seems to be hesitation to do hybrids. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Birnbaum and then Barbara Chalky. You're unmuted,
yes.
Michelle.
Yes, thank you. During this time, I'm very grateful that we have Zoom meetings and virtual meetings. It certainly is a way that we've all been able, through many facets of our lives, stay connected, not only with business, not only with community boards, but with family and friends. So this is really terrific. However, going forward, I don't believe that we should have in-person meetings until we actually have a vaccine. And I suspect that that limitation really, or that accommodation really will not be in effect until we do have a vaccine. I am opposed to hybrid meetings. I think that the fact that community board meetings and committee meetings live stream, the public is apprised of what we are doing. If they have advanced agendas, they can certainly write in comments as they have done in the past. I think that a hybrid meeting is a big imposition on those that are present. It makes for a very, very long meeting. As you see, there are delays between responses. It's not the most convenient way to do it. The other thing is, I think when we get back to normal, our in-person meetings should be the way to go. Also, I would ask that we have no resolution on this tonight. I think this is a wonderful conversation. I think it's a conversation that we may want to continue, but I don't think that anything affirmative or any resolution should happen tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Barbara Chalky.
Yes, and I like to, first of all, I agree with
Michelle, that we should not have a resolution tonight. But I also want to follow up what Chuck said. A lot of you who have been on the board with me know how strongly I believe in open meeting law. When I worked for the New York State Department of State, the open meeting group met really, it was part of the New York Department of State. And there's some horror stories about what happens throughout the state when people try to have closed meetings and don't invite the public. So I wouldn't want anybody to fool around with it, and any major changes in the open meeting law. Changes you make have to be very, very carefully done. I don't think we're going to be able to have open meetings. I mean, have public meetings where we go virtual, where we go in person for a while yet, until we probably have the vaccine. But it's a very important issue to me. We really cannot have meetings where the whole is not completely open, and we wouldn't want to change the state law because it's to think of all these places throughout the state that would love to have all closed meetings.
Oh, that would be pretty. It would be pretty scary to think about not having to, not requiring community boards to have meetings that everyone could attend and where there's a transparency. I don't think anyone would advocate for that, but it's a good point that you raise. Vanessa, do you mind, can we skip over you until after everyone who hasn't spoken yet has a chance to? Because you already spoke on this issue, right?
She's giving a thumbs up.
Okay, so let's go to Kaz and then Elizabeth. Oh, Elizabeth, you spoke on this issue too. So I'm going to ask you if you would wait also. We just have Kaz and Sandrea in case anyone else wants to raise their hand. Kaz, go ahead.
I'm just curious. I think I was the person at the last meeting that we just kept going on and on and on. Is the governor going to, are we going back to the open law next month or 6 months or 12 months or 18 months down the road? I mean, the discussion should be had, but I think what we should all do is think about what we would like, what we would recommend, and wait until the law or the open meeting gets reinstated. I mean, until then, we're just spinning wheels. And this happened last time. We went on till 10, 11, 12 o'clock, and everybody's got their opinion. We're not voting on anything tonight, and we're just spinning wheels again and again and again. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Sandrea? We'll go to, and Sharon, I'll ask you the same thing. If we could go to Sandrea and then Jack. Sandrea, Will, would you unmute her?
Sandrea, you just have to push the button on your screen to confirm unmuting.
Okay. All right. Hello. Greetings. I am open to a hybrid format meeting when the time comes for in-person meetings. Members should have an option in a time such as this. Even after a vaccine is available, we have to remain vigilant post-COVID. Board members in the community should be safe at all times. Open meetings when they resume will be very different from what the board is used to. The board should begin preparing for the time when we can gather together, needs such as sanitizing before and after. We will also have to designate an individual to take temperatures, our temperature, even upon arrival. So there's a lot to be done when it's time to return back, and we should be focusing on that as well. And as well as giving people the option of the hybrid, not as a permanent solution, but a temporary solution till people are fully comfortable, because we do have different age groups, people with different underlying and possibly conditions and so forth. And you don't want to put anybody at risk, nor the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandrea. Okay, Jack? Did Jack just say Jack's right there? Okay.
I missed the in-person meetings, but I also like the greater accessibility that virtual meetings have brought us, especially for our Roosevelt Island friends. But just a silly question, or maybe a premature question: what does hybrid even look like, or what would that even, how would that even work? I'm having trouble thinking about what that would look like, but maybe it's premature.
I don't think anyone of us knows what it would look like. So let's go back then to the people who've already spoken, and I'd ask if you could keep your comments succinct. I know you had specific points you wanted to address. Vanessa and Elizabeth and Sharon.
Hi. Thank you. Actually, these were great comments to go right after because I couldn't agree more with everything that Sandrea said. And I think while I understand that the open meetings law is a law and that I understand that it probably won't be enforced or the suspension will not be ended very soon, there will be a time when when the suspension will be ended, and we will still have people who don't necessarily feel comfortable and feel like they have to make a choice. I really have some, I don't even know what the word is. I question those who have spoken so strongly against a hybrid meeting for Jack's exact point. I have a little bit of suspicion of how many people have actually attended meetings that are half in person and half on Zoom, because this is new territory. And I want to also remind us that just a couple months ago in March, when I was too expressing deep concern about the March meeting, we didn't even think this was possible. We didn't even think this was possible. So right now, to reject something that we don't even know what it could look like, I feel like is very narrow-minded and is not opening ourselves up to opportunities. I also respectfully disagree with the comments and the decisions that have been made about the use of all of the tools that these virtual platforms, Zoom, that we're currently using, offer. I know that decisions were made about the chat, but I do think that there are a lot of different parts of this platform that could be used that we're not even exploring right now that could help enhance the conversation of the meeting, the flow, the information. Just last week, I was on a Zoom meeting with close to 700 people where we managed to use the chat without any problems. And in some ways, we could use the fact that there's a public record of the chat to our advantage. We don't have to discuss the exact chat. That's just an example of a lot of tools that right now are at our disposal that we've rejected because we're not willing to sort of think of other opportunities. So what I encourage, I realize we shouldn't make a resolution tonight. I really think there's a few different issues at play about what's working and what's not working in this virtual platform. If we have to be in this virtual platform for 18 months now, how could we improve it? And then also, as Sandrea said, planning for when things do start to calm down, how are we going to adapt? And I think that that means a few more meetings, maybe even working groups with people who want to explore some more of these digital options before we dive into really making recommendations that would impact a law. But I do think that this conversation is the right time, and we should continue to think about this and not just let sort of history happen to us. We have an opportunity to be innovative right now, to use our voice as a community board to make recommendations, and to use everything that we've learned during these past few months to help make our meetings, as we transition to the gold standard of in-person meetings, as productive as possible.
Okay. Thank you. And if you have ideas about how to use things, digital tools or other things that we can incorporate, I, for one, would be really interested in knowing what they are. The chat, I hadn't really thought about people using it so much between each other, but more to talk to me and Will, and it is really hard to concentrate when it's all flashing by. But if it's private, it's a whole different issue, and I don't know what the mechanisms for that are. Because I know that people have been chatting me through Will right now and not even directly, so that's not even an option, and it may be because I'm not a host, so I don't know how any of that looks. Okay, I know that Elizabeth and Sharon, you've been patient, but Marco and Billy have not spoken yet, so I'd like to go to them first. If we could go to Marco and then Billy and then back to Elizabeth if no one else raises their hand. So we'll, Marco, you're unmuted.
Thank you. I think everything has been said. I propose, and I would like that if somebody want a second, is I would like to table the issue. Thank you. Can anybody second?
I only saw Cause's thumb go up.
Okay, a second. Thank you.
Okay, then we should be having a discussion of tabling this issue. So everyone who has their hands raised, you've got to lower them and raise them again if you want to speak to tabling this conversation. Okay, Cause, and then Billy, and then Sharon. This is all on the tabling argument. Go. Cause.
Okay.
You're unmuted.
Okay, I think, last time we kept going on and on. It's an important conversation to have. We don't want to make decisions on the fly. I think we should come up with a plan of what we really, really want to do in the future, whether it's an in-person or both or virtual or hybrid. The hybrid is a mixture of, basically in-person and virtual. So I think we can all come up with certain recommendations and let's, put our heads together. But we could be discussing this for the next hour or two, and we're not going to get anywhere. So, and the rescinding of the open meeting, it's not going to be for months yet. So let's discuss this in a proper way. Come up with plans or recommendations to basically suggest what we would like. And go from there. But I think just carrying on this discussion, once a month, it's going to be fruitless.
So are you suggesting?
Sorry.
Are you suggesting creating a working group to come up with recommendations that could be presented to the board at another special meeting like this?
I think everybody on the board has their ideas of what they would like to do, when they would like to do it, and in what way. So I think if we all write our recommendations, send it in to you and Will, then we could basically have a select meeting, basically the board, without the public, and come up with suggestions. Once we come up with the suggestions, then we can have an open meeting, discuss it, let the public weigh in on what we feel is the proper way to go. So, I mean, we could be, having hundreds of people, everybody's got a different opinion, and we're not going to get anywhere. So
I think
sorry.
And I think your idea sounds very intriguing, except that I think the idea would violate the open meetings law, which is that even committees can't formulate resolutions in advance of even to propose. I'm not sure about having a board meeting without the public being invited to discuss these things would be a good idea, but it's something that could be looked into. Look, we have until September anyway, because we don't meet in August, to figure out how to do this. I, for one, am about being proactive, and I'd much rather have a sense of what we would like to recommend to Albany and not wait for them. So to be prepared for that, especially because listening to everyone, it's very complex, and all of you have raised interesting points that hadn't been raised by other people. And as you point out, there's a lot to be said. So I will figure out with anyone who is interested in this, how to go about this so that everyone is heard, because it is important. It's important for the board. And even something like this, I can't say now, because everyone will lose their place in line. All of you who are in favor of doing something like Cos suggests, raise your hand, because then people lower their hands, they raise it, and then they may not raise it in time if there's a time limit to be able to participate in the following discussion. So this kind of meeting is great, but it certainly is no substitute in terms of issues like that. So I'm going on for a while, and I shouldn't be. So I'll try, for anyone who's interested and has ideas about how to do this in a public setting, then by all means, send them in. So thank you, Kaz, for thinking creatively like that. And for everyone else, I think this is really important, and all of the other boards share that. Billy, Will, would you unmute it, Billy? Billy,
So
you're
I've
unmuted.
been listening to everyone's comments, and you know, so much has been said already that I think was right on the money, starting with Sharon and you know, Rebecca Dangoran, Andrea, and many others have just said things I completely agree with. And then right up to Kaz, who kind of took the words out of my mouth. A, I don't think this is something we can make a decision on right now. B, I think it makes a lot of sense to have a working group or a committee. And I didn't quite follow why there'd be an open meetings problem, because why not just have an ad hoc committee that meets publicly on Zoom to discuss these things? But here's my only concern about that, because otherwise I think it's a good idea. You know, this seems to me an issue that affects all the community boards. And I don't know what the Manhattan Borough President office is doing right now, but there should be maybe something run centrally out of the MBP's office to talk about what the community boards can do going forward, and whether we can make a united front to request the funding we need to run whatever a hybrid would look like. But personally, I think a hybrid, based on everything I've heard, and I echo Jack's sort of skepticism, I don't see how it would work. I don't see us having the technical capability of running a hybrid approach. And so notwithstanding, or until we have a technical capability, I think we have to remain all virtual until there's a vaccine. And for a very, very fundamental reason. There are people in our community who are immunocompromised, who will not feel safe in going to a meeting. They will be shut out of this very important democratic process of ours. And that is sort of a red line that we cannot cross. And I hear all the calls for coming back to public meetings. I miss you all very much as well. And I look forward to robust back and forths on bike lanes and other important matters. But, you know, we have to be patient, because there is a massive public health risk out there. And it would, you know, we create a sort of man-made risk to our democratic institutions by suddenly going back to in-person meetings and shutting a lot of people out. So I just think we got to be patient and wait for a vaccine, or wait for a suitable hybrid approach, which I don't see happening unless we have a huge infusion of funding for community boards. So the upshot of what I'm trying to say is, yes, let's have a committee to discuss it. It'll be a great vehicle for people to get expertise and really think these things through with the time this issue deserves. And maybe it ought to be run out of the borough president's office, even bringing together all the Manhattan community boards. But I don't think this is something for us to resolve in this meeting right now. And until we resolve it, we should just continue with these virtual meetings as is.
I don't think, just to clarify, my comment to Kaz about the open meetings law was it didn't sound like he was talking about a public meeting. If he's talking about a public meeting, then clearly there's no issue. If he's talking about just board members, then that raises some issues, and I don't know what the answer is. And I don't think anyone is suggesting that people come back to a meeting without a vaccine or without proper precautions because of the health risks. That is precisely what everyone has suggested. So I think that should be completely off the table, the idea of having an in-person meeting without there being a health situation that would allow for that to happen. And I think if the governor brought back the open meetings law before everyone was ready for it, I think there would be some kind of rebellion. So I would rather just talk about what happens once it's safe to go back to in-person meetings.
And Alita, I meant to call the question to table. Am I allowed to?
Oh, on the tabling issue, Billy?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yep.
Okay. I know that I see Sharon and Michelle and Barry. Barry hasn't had a chance to speak. Sharon and Michelle have. This is just about the tabling. Barry went away. Did Barry go away? I don't mean really.
I believe Barry was going to do the same thing.
Okay. So then unless Barry, is that what you're doing? Are you seconding?
He's nodding, yes.
And causes as well. All right, so then I think since we're just talking about tabling it, I'll just skip, I hope you don't mind, Michelle and whoever else. I know there was someone else who had raised their hands. And let's just vote. We have a different secretary who wants to call the roll for the voting on the tabling of a discussion on in-person and virtual meetings. Is there? Okay. Is there a secretary here? I know I'm looking at Billy. Anyone else? I don't see any hands raised. So Billy, it's all yours. Go ahead. Oh, I see Rebecca. So let's give Rebecca a chance. Sorry, Billy. Rebecca, are you ready?
I think it's, I can do it, but I thought Rebecca, the other Rebecca was going to do this vote, but I can do it.
I don't see her hand, so it's okay. You go ahead, Rebecca.
All right, so if you would like to vote no, abstain, or not vote for cause on tabling, please raise your hand.
Do we need to have a tabling goal of when we can resurrect the conversation? Should that be part or just temporarily? Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay. Going once, going twice, seeing none, the motion passes unanimously.
Great. Okay. So then, again, sorry, needed some light. For anyone who has ideas about how to proceed, I'm all ears. Not right this second, but in general. Okay, I'd like to turn to the last item on the agenda, which is a conversation on how the board could better support the Black members of our community and Black businesses within our community. I know, okay, Barbara, you raised your hand, and I know that Wilma also has something that she'd like to contribute. So why don't we, because I don't see her raising her hand. So Barbara, why don't you go ahead? And this was really intended to be, the way I had thought of it was for members of the community to just talk about the things that matter to them. No speakers, no resolutions, just really to listen. But having said that, I don't see anyone else raising their hand. So I'll go with Barbara and then hopefully Wilma. Okay, we have Sandrea. Let's go to Sandrea first.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. I think Will wasn't unmuting me.
Okay, we'll go to Barbara first. Go ahead, Barbara. And then I see Mrs. Brown, Lorraine Brown, and Sandrea. So go ahead, Barbara, and then them.
Like simple questions, Alita. How do we change this major thing? I think every single committee has something to do. If it's just businesses, you can go on a website. We could reinvent the wheel, but there are websites that talk about Black businesses. I'd be curious to know the ones in our area. There was my favorite shoe store was Black owned, and the landlord wouldn't renew, executive shoe store wouldn't renew it on 3rd Avenue. We now have a cookie place for very skinny people. There must be no calories in these delicious cookies because very thin people go. Every single committee, if you want to talk about education in our community, I know what I have heard is there are schools that are predominantly Black and schools that are predominantly not Black. Certainly the health committee, I think we can go for the next 42 years with issues that would be affecting. Housing needs to address what to do. So I think that this is just such an overwhelming topic. Certainly anything to do with judicial justice and mental health and every single subject, every single committee deals with this. And I would sort of like to, maybe each committee should talk about environment. I just read a wonderful book, What the Eyes Don't See, about the Flint situation. If you want to talk about environmental injustice, and I do know that some of the projects and some of the less, some of the buildings have terrible asbestos and mold and all that aren't there, that there is a divide with that. So I just think every single committee should be able to come up and maybe send you some ideas of what we want to do.
That I would like to hear that, of course, and I have asked committees to, and not with respect as much, but to come up with ideas and talk about things. But this was supposed to be a way for people in the community who might have felt that they were not listened to, that they don't have a voice, because community boards are the lowest level city agency, and that here is a direct line into the city for people who have otherwise felt somewhat removed from the government processes. So I see Sandrea, and then I don't know what happened to
For some reason,
Lorraine Brown.
Wilma's hand just isn't raising virtually. Would you like me
Okay.
to unmute her? Because I knew you'd recognize her at
Yeah,
the
let's
beginning.
go. Let's go to Wilma first, and then Sandrea, and then I don't know what happened to Lorraine Brown. So but she was on. Okay, Wilma, go ahead, please.
Hi.
Hi.
I spent a good part of the day today searching around our district to find out if there were any Black-owned businesses. And if I am wrong and not finding any, I would like somebody to let me know where they are. I wish there was a way to introduce Black businesses, in our community. I wish there was some way for us for all the stores that are closed and never going to come back, or stores that decide to go someplace or another state. There are a lot of storefronts and openings, and if there was a way to get more or any owned businesses in our community, I hope that it would be appreciated. Thank you.
There would be. So I would like to try. I don't know how. Sandrea, Will, would you unmute Sandrea?
Hi again, all. I reflect on maybe about 2 decades ago. I used to attend a salon, Black-owned salon called Crown and Glory. I was on Lexington Avenue in the upper 60s when I was working out of the 19. But due to rent and everything like that, sometimes those businesses just can't stay afloat because they're not, they just don't have the funding. But it was a very pricey salon compared to the other ones I have been before and after. And it was a good salon. And I did go on my lunch break and so forth. But we have to see that it's affordable for them as well, because the area is so pricey. It's very hard for them to sustain. Also, I would like to say that recognize what one is privy to over a person of color. That's one of the issues, if we're going to speak just straightforward about the privilege that others have and some people of color don't have. We need to educate, people need to educate themselves about Black history and understand that silence is complicit, and hire, promote, and support Black professionals if they are qualified. That's very important, because at the end of the day, when one suffer, we all suffer. And that's just all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone has any resources, I've been working on compiling a list of, and I know there's a ton of information out there on resources for people to become more educated and more aware. We could certainly publish those. So please feel free to send them to me or to Will, who'll pass them on. Are there any, before we go back to the board members, are there any other members of the community that would like to participate and to have a say now? Okay, I don't see anyone raising their hands from the community, so why don't we go to Craig?
Hi again. So building off of what Wilma was saying, I think one of my frustrations is that I don't have any idea either what businesses within our community are Black-owned businesses or businesses that are owned by people of color. I don't know if there would be any interest in Community Board 8 spearheading some sort of effort to promote them, or have put out some sort of flyer or a sticker or a poster that could be put in windows of any business that wishes to participate, indicating that it is a Black-owned business or business owned by people of color, so the general population would know and may seek them out in order to try to frequent them. And it goes back to our general issue with also just not always knowing who owns any business. And if we're all trying to promote small and frequent small businesses and independent businesses, how do we really know who that is, and if a seemingly small business isn't what it appears to be. And then the other thing, which is slightly off topic, but I think is relevant as well, is perhaps we want to even expand this effort, and this goes along with the idea that maybe all committees have a role in this, but have we ever considered having some sort of perhaps task force for people of color, or something that will allow Community Board A to address issues regarding people of color and whether it be promoting businesses or other issues that are faced on a regular basis, like police matters and such, but things that are more systemic, that really encompass more than just this topic, but really need to be discussed holistically.
In terms of holistic discussion, I've reached out to all of the Manhattan community boards for joint participation in programs and borough-wide programs on issues of racial equity, social justice, and more than half have responded positively. I haven't heard from the other half yet, so I think that that's a way so that we reach all of Manhattan and have a diverse group of people on all ends of it. And for specific local issues, we have our committees that are able to plan and talk about and come to some kind of resolution, or have forums with speakers on various local issues right now. But I'm listening to everybody. So, okay. Thank you, Craig. Billy, and then Tricia, and then Sharon.
Just a couple things on this. I hope I'm not, putting anyone on the spot. I know a couple of us have voiced, a view that there should be some sort of task force on these issues, and I want to be, and I want to particularly, call out Sandrea for, raising this. I'm being a little hesitant here because I think we're all trying our best, and I think there's an effort, and maybe it's rightly so, to see what the work the committees can do, and I have a few thoughts on that. But I do think there may be an appropriate time for us to consider whether a community board, racial justice committee, or task force is warranted. But let's start first with the committees. I think if we're going to look to our committees to tackle these questions, there ought to be a very specific directive, and that is each committee should have a meeting and produce something, I'll just call it a report, on what that committee and its subject matter area should be considering, and what are the racial justice implications, what's the history of systemic racism as it goes to transit or small business or housing or anything in our city. So I think that would be important. And bigger picture, every year we put out a district needs statement, and I would like to see us have a district needs statement that considers the racial justice needs of our community. We have a population, I believe, is 3.7% Black. What is it that we can do, should do at all levels of government to rectify that, to acknowledge the barriers, the racial barriers that exist in our neighborhood, in our city. So I don't see why, whether put that in the district needs statement or make that its own report. I think that would be completely appropriate, and it's something where we could look to each committee to separately contribute to. But Wilma, I think you're right. That's my understanding as well. No Black-owned businesses in Community District 8. I think we all have to ask ourselves why that is. It's obviously, there's a long history in this country, and it's too complicated for this one meeting, which is why I go to sort of my last idea, which is let's have a full board meeting where somebody, instead of a land use presentation or something at the beginning, let's have somebody speak to the state of Black-owned businesses in New York City and in our district. Let's have someone with true expertise who has studied these issues, who can give us guidance. Because look, this is an overwhelmingly white board, and I think with few exceptions, not many of us have the expertise to tackle this really entrenched problem. So I think we would benefit from starting off with somebody presenting to us, helping us gain the expertise, giving us a foundation for doing our own work as a community. And then lastly, let's find ways to reach out to the people in our community who are Black and brown, who don't necessarily look like this community board, but we know they're in our community. They might not always come to our meetings, but they're they're our neighbors, they're brothers and sisters, and I think we have an obligation to meet them where they are, not expect them to come to our community board meetings necessarily. So I think those are all things we should at least be considering.
Thank you. Okay, Tricia?
Hi, everybody. I just want to be very brief. I think that I thought I'd be more clear by the time it got to me. I think that this is such an important conversation to have, and I'm really glad to have it with the entire board. And I applaud, thank you, Alita, for creating an opportunity for everybody to talk about it. I really am attracted to the idea of thinking about systemic racism through each committee and thinking about equity issues through each committee. I think that is interesting, or not just interesting, but it raises interesting questions that maybe we haven't considered in the past. And I would be very supportive of us kind of pursuing that route. I want to share something very briefly, and I recognizing that I benefit from a lot of privilege of my own and from my own personal life. But a lot of this has brought up a memory that I had when the 2nd Avenue subway had opened up. We were in the subway, and Dove and I noticed that a woman was walking with her skirt unzipped. And I went over to her and I tapped her on the shoulder to let her know that her skirt was unzipped, and she screamed and grabbed her purse and thought that I was trying to rob her. And my husband had to go over and tell her that I wasn't trying to rob her, that I was just trying to tell her that something was wrong with her skirt. And it's always struck me in that moment of there are just so many underlying biases. And again, that's just a small minor thing from someone who is a person of color, but not a Black person. And there's a lot of more at stake here, but I like the idea of thinking about the undercurrents of bias that are in that run maybe through our committees, through our own lives here on the Upper East Side. I think it's very important for a community that isn't majority people of color or majority Black, for us to be having these conversations too. It makes it bigger, and it elevates it. So I would be very supportive of the idea that we continue these conversations past tonight, that we continue these conversations in our committees, and that we kind of make it on equity and racial justice an issue that is kind of weaves throughout everything that we do.
Okay, and one of the topics that I've talked to the other boards about doing is a program on implicit bias. So it does come up in many contexts. Okay, Sharon and then Brian, is there anyone from the public? Because the purpose of this was, again, to provide an ear for people in the public, but it's fine that it's turned into this, but I just want to make sure that anyone who might be interested in speaking has an opportunity. Okay, Sharon, you're unmuted.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for your comments, Sandra. I really appreciate them, and I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. And also thank you, Billy, as well as Tricia. Two things. One, more directly to answer a question about Black-owned businesses and how do we find it? How do we find them and locate them? Yelp has begun a new initiative to list whether or not businesses are Black-owned. And that's a good place to start. They would obviously have to self-identify as such and contact Yelp, but that certainly, and I'm not, I don't work for Yelp, I'm not supporting Yelp, I'm just saying that that's certainly a place to start. And companies and committees and organizations around the country are having these types of conversations. And I'd like to thank Alita and Bill as well. Will, not Bill, Alita and Will for initiating this conversation. And although we are talking about Black-owned businesses, I really want to follow up something specifically that Tricia said, and that's the idea of intrinsic biases. And I should say that we should look internally as well overall. And I think that Billy touched on this. And more specifically with Black-owned businesses, but with our communities overall, and certainly how we interact with each other on the board. I'll tell you that one of the reasons, and this is very low on my list, but one of the reasons why having these virtual meetings is because you get to see who raises their hands. And often I have certainly been in meetings where I've raised my hand and have done so consistently and often over a period of time and have been ignored consistently. So it is, and I understand that these intrinsic biases do take place, and they do happen even within the community board. And it speaks a lot to the board members, to Alita, to our executive team, our executive staff of the board, that and board members overall, that we're engaging in this conversation. So although I know that we were supposed to focus exclusively on Black-owned businesses, I'm really happy that we're expanding it a bit so that we look internally within the board as well as externally about what we can do.
Thank you. Brian, and Sharon, you and I could, well, anyway, Brian and then May and Greg Morris.
Yeah,
Brian?
I appreciate it. Thanks, Lita. As this conversation was going on, I actually started scouring the city's website for MBE or Minority Business Enterprise businesses that were certified, and looking up two CB8 zip codes. I have found like 3 businesses so far. I think I'm going to make it a point, to kind of look up all the zip codes in CB8 to try to see if I can identify names of businesses, addresses that has phone numbers and emails, and I'd be happy to share that list with Alita, you, and Will, so that way we can at least identify. Second thing, I do want to piggyback on what Billy was saying, because I think it really is important we're talking about it now as a group, and then to take it back to the committee level. And I think, maybe a task for each committee is to answer the question that's here on the agenda, which is how can the specific committee create a mission statement to support Black businesses? And I think that would be a good task for each committee to do on its own, and then maybe bring back to the next board meeting.
Brian, when you find out whether other Black-owned businesses, we could then approach them and ask if they would want some kind of sticker like that to put in their window. We have an actually really talented designer who's an intern in the office, and she did a great flyer for how the community could support small businesses. So maybe it's something to think about, approaching them and asking if they would want something to identify. They may or may not, I don't know, but that's something that someone had raised. So thank you for doing that. Okay, May and then Greg. May, you're not unmuted yet. You are now.
Can you hear me? Okay,
yes.
Great. So I echo a lot of what's been said. I want to piggyback also off of what the points that Billy made. Agree with the idea of a task force. I agree that the work of supporting Black community members and business owners should be undertaken by all committees. I think in addition to answering the question and maybe coming up with an action plan, a guiding strategy is to look at like all the activities of the committee and assess them through a real equity lens. There are frameworks out there. In fact, I know of many that are undertaking a similar process internally to just understand what are we doing and what can we do better. In terms of, I think the biggest issue is we definitely have a deficit of Black community members, and the fact that there is no one from the community, and please correct me if someone did speak who is here to ask a question, says a lot, but it sounds like we're all in agreement that that has to be changed. I think a fundamental question for me is how do we as a community board and how does the network of community boards broadly across the city promote community board participation? Like how are we promoting it? To whom are we promoting? Are we being really intentional about ensuring that we are diversifying and this opportunity citywide to ensure that not only are we attracting Black community members and more of them, but we're attracting people who represent an intersection of a number of identities, including hopefully more LGBTQ plus identifying community members, et cetera. So yeah, and then I strongly agree with a lot of the sentiments shared, particularly by Brian and Billy and Wilma and Sandrea.
Thank you. Okay, Greg?
Yeah, hi.
You're unmuted, Greg. Hi.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So let me just echo some of the comments I've already heard, but also just start, obviously I'm a white male and I have no doubt benefited from power and privilege throughout the course of my life. And I think a starting point to acknowledge that is an important thing for those of us who have experienced that power and privilege to sort of start with. I am also the executive director of an organization that largely serves Black and brown people and is largely run by Black and brown folks. And so again, there are ways in which the experience that they have had and what they experience is very different than what I have experienced. And I need to both be a good listener, I need to be an ally, and I need to work relentlessly in support of addressing systemic racism. I'm starting kind of framing my thoughts in that way because I think this community board, as folks have said, does not appear by virtue of a quick glance to be the most diverse board. And I think when we think about the topics and the opportunities and the ways in which we communicate and the content we cover, one might argue as well, it doesn't feel particularly inclusive. But I say that saying as well that I've been around for a year and maybe I don't know as much as I should. I guess my more pertinent point to this is that the first question has to be, I think, what does this community board want to be? And if it is a desire to represent the needs of all of the community, to the last speaker's point, the fact that community members are not participating in this part of the agenda, I think says a lot. I think the reframing, the reorganization and perhaps operates and how this board intersects with the needs of the community, all community members, probably has to change. And I think identifying Black-owned businesses is a pretty low bar. It's important, it's critical, but it's the least we could do. I think the effort to be made to talk about what the value of this board is, how this board seeks to interact and engage with the community, regardless of what block you live in, and represent the needs of the residents, regardless of how they identify, is critically important. I think the committees are a great venue for that. But the starting point has to be that there is a collective understanding, perhaps, and a statement to be made to say that this board values, understands, appreciates that what its job is, and that is to represent the needs of its community. At the same time, I think there's something important about us in this moment of national reckoning to say that there is systemic racism, and we need to speak up any chance we get to address that, because that racism disproportionately impacts Black and brown folks. That may not be the typical nature of a community board, but our moment in time, our moment in history has shifted. It's changed. And we can either step into it and lean into it and make it part and parcel of who we are, as some of the speakers have sort of noted, or we can hope it passes. It's my hope and my interest as a member of this board to do more than I have done thus far, to call out what I see and to push on the buttons that we need to push on to ensure that this community and our communities really understand what the value of this is and that it does represent all, and also that we have work to do as a board that's largely filled with privileged folks, that we have to understand implicit bias and we have to understand microaggression, and we are not going to be content to just sit back and be part of systems that have disproportionately impacted folks who may look differently than we do. I believe everybody on this call is well-intentioned, and we're all probably on different sort of ranges of the spectrum in terms of what we believe or how we believe. But I do believe as representatives in this moment, in this national moment of reckoning, as I said, we've got to do more. We've got to do more. And it starts with acknowledging who we are, what is unacceptable, and then it begins a process of figuring out what are the mechanisms and steps we can take to be better than this.
Thank you. There's a member of the public, Paige Montgomery. I'd like to have her speak next. Will, would you unmute her? Thank you. Paige?
Yes, thank you. And I really appreciated all of this discussion, and particularly what Greg, the last speaker, I believe that was your name, was just saying. I love the thinking about trying to understand and listen past our biases. I like the unconscious bias training ideas. I like being able to reach out and understand who the community board is and what they represent. And I was just going to say, as y'all were talking about getting a list of the Black businesses in the community, it would be really helpful to hear from them what would be helpful. I think, you know, what I have learned in through my professional career development, that we're tackling this as well. We're trying to listen to those Black and brown community members, colleagues, to understand, because as much as we want to try to understand and listen, we don't walk in those shoes. So I just really echo the things that I've heard, and would love to see having people brought in, either call to, you know, ask what could be helpful, and bring in those community members to hear their voices. And thank you.
Yeah, that was the idea for this part of the meeting, was to have people from the community, but maybe there wasn't sufficient outreach or something. So we will work on that, because absolutely listening is critical. Okay, Sandrea, and then Rebecca and Rita, Rebecca Lamort. So Sandrea, Will? Okay, you're unmuted.
Okay, hi. Sorry, I'm back again. So let me make this statement. Systemic racism and our social justice is not limited to just Black people nor the LGBTQ community. I feel that this board does not have to collaborate with other boards in Manhattan. That to me is CB8 hanging in the shadows. If we are going to impact the community that the board serves, then we should spearhead a task force and/or a committee that can focus on this type of work. Other committees have their own focus, and they cannot take on these issues effectively compared to a task force and/or a new committee that can solely do the work. They can solely focus on the work. So that's my feeling of us blending it into different meetings. It's not going to be the same impact. It's not going to be the same effect. If we're going to really do this work, we need to form something that a few people can get on, and the community can probably be on board, have speakers and so forth to come in. If we're going to do the work, we should do the work. If we're going to do it as a community board. That's it.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Yeah, this is about more than just Black-owned businesses to me. I think we have a real opportunity, like Sandrea just said, to really make something more of this and not have it be a Manhattan board thing, but a CB8 thing. Because right now, while we're meeting, hundreds of our community members are at Carl Schurz Park marching to support racial equity and justice. And I think the community is really ready for change that's not just supporting a Black-owned business, but it's the board having a mission statement about racial equity and justice and the work we want to do to right past wrongs in our neighborhood, be it with zoning or transportation access or education inequity. And for the task force, what comes to mind is perhaps it's the task force where there's an appointee from each committee, and that way all the committees are represented, so all the issues are there, but it's not just focused on one little niche area. It's, you know, racism is pervasive, racism is everywhere. And I say that as a little white lady that has more privilege than some people in our community will ever know. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that, like Greg said, and we really do the gritty work, which isn't going to be easy and it's not going to be comfortable for everyone. And, you know, I've gone to these vigils and a lot of what's said is, you know, people of color in our community say, I don't think I belong here. I didn't think there was a place for me here. I didn't think my neighbors cared. And in my opinion, it's really incumbent on the community board as a whole, not just to say, yeah, we care about Black businesses, but we care in general about this issue and we're going to take it seriously. So I know we're going to recess in August, but maybe in September, we kick it off with the task force where there's representation from each committee and we have representation from Black leaders in our community. So there are the voices leading, and that we as white allies were, you know, just complimenting and uplifting, because I think we'll take up perhaps too much space in this conversation. And a part of it is also really taking that back seat so we can learn and grow and educate ourselves to really be mindful about the work ahead and what we need to be do that's purposeful and not just performative or for show.
But certainly the goal is to make a difference. Thank you. Rita? Rita?
You know,
You're unmuted.
a lot of this is systemic. Just this weekend, one of our council members said there are 300 available affordable apartments on Roosevelt Island. And at the same time, there is a new development in East New York, Brooklyn. And in doing a comparison of where the AMI was, basically only 24 families, 24 out of the entire, in Brooklyn, out of the entire building, which is almost 300 apartments, 24 people could qualify to apply on Roosevelt Island because of the AMI. So what it is that we have segregated neighborhoods. And if we want to desegregate, you have to start with desegregating the neighborhoods. And what it is that tax abatements are given to bigger developers, and that's one, desegregating the neighborhoods. The other thing is that the media. I stopped watching the network 11 o'clock news because all I saw on the news were people who were behaving badly. And more often than not, they were a person of color. That is not fair. It's not fair. And so therefore, it carries over. It's a halo effect. It carries over to other things. I go up to Harlem to buy food because I happen to like a lot of that stuff. Could it exist here? It's not a community board. It takes everything. This is just the icing on the cake. I'm talking about the cake. We have to bake the cake first before we ice it. And that's, you know, that's where I want to see it start. We can start. We could do it. That's my thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Lorraine Brown?
Ms. Brown, you may have to push a button on your screen to confirm.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. Firstly, I have just checked my filter. Secondly, I want to thank Sharon Pope Marshall for your comments. I agree with you 100%. Thirdly, I'm going to be succinct and say that everyone on this call and on this board needs to self-audit, do a self-audit to a place of discomfort and ask if you want to be on the right side of history. This is not a Black issue. This is a human rights issue. And if you want to do the work, I'll participate. But if it's just lip service, more of the same, shame on you. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Barbara, I'm going to skip to Sarah and Jack because they haven't had a chance to participate. Will, would you unmute? Sarah, you're unmuted.
Hi, I just want to thank my colleagues so much and for raising this issue and being open to it, and for this broad energy that's moving on wanting to take on this issue. I just I'm remembering back in the day, I think Taina and Elizabeth were part of about 10 or 12 years ago. We were having a discussion about the JREC complex in I think 68th and 2nd, and whether or not the school would be raised to be replaced with a research center for Hunter. And I was really surprised and struck by some of the comments from the that I heard in the course of those community board meetings. And at one point, someone from the community stood up and said, "These kids don't look like us. They aren't our children." And so it was something that was really painful to hear, and I've held on to it all these years. But the great news is that I think that our community has changed a lot. We see it at Carl Schurz, and we hear it among all of us. And so thank you for the energy and the desire to do this work. I would just say that as someone who works for a social justice organization and who's gone through these implicit bias trainings, and who, with my colleagues at work, and we've done a number of these different kinds of trainings, it's really painful and it's really hard, and it's something that we need to work on for quite some time. And so I hope that this task force is a start, and that this isn't something that we spend a few months on and move past, but that it's something that we really integrate into the work that we do and into the frame that through which we do our work. So thank you everybody for being so open and for being so thoughtful about taking this on. And I really hope to be a part of it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Jack?
Yeah,
You're unmuted.
yeah, I'm muted. I just wanted to share, since we're having this conversation, something that I've learned recently through conversations I've had through my school. Throughout the year, we've had some race issues at my school, and we have a lot of conversations about how we can address that, how we can fix it. And in our efforts to listen, I have learned that some of the African American or people of color people in my school feel that sometimes people put too much pressure on them to educate us on what we're doing wrong instead of we just educating ourselves. They feel as though it's not their job to educate us on our prejudices or our racism, and they feel as though it's uncomfortable for them to be the only person in a room when talking about race and everyone turns to them and expects them to speak up when they don't want to speak up. So I welcome the conversation, and it is important to listen. It's just also important not to cross the line. We're forcing people to speak so we can listen, but rather simply just listen. I thought it was just something I could share.
Thank you. Marco?
Thank you. I would like to say that small business, especially restaurants, I don't think we have in America, no even a minority. Most of them, there are different kind of owners. And because very simple, people that have good quality, such as Marcus Samuelson, one of the biggest chefs in the world, he preferred to go to a 125th. He doesn't want to be in the Upper East Side. And he's right. And I respect that. The other point that I would like to raise is social equity. Many times in the community board, they come into us and they saying, we want to build more affluent area, and we want to put our affordable housing in the Bronx. It should be right here in our community. This is a shame, and nobody say anything. And I has been fighting a lot for that, because any floor area that give it to the developer is not gonna give you to the Bronx. So create, like Rita says, segregation, spatial segregation. And that is wrong. That's why we have to stand up against that. And another issue is affordable housing. How affordable housing has to tackle as a minority. So it's according with the income. Obviously, in that group, there is a lot of African Americans and Latinos too. So if we tackle in that direction, we can create a difference in our community. Second, another point that we have is the program 421A. This 421A is just only to make richer the developer. It's nothing for the community, no any community benefit for that. Why? Because it's very simple. They give you just only 20 years, the developer, to have a very limited income, and after that become owner of the whole development. So the developer that is very rich at the beginning become richer after 20 years, because the program 421A evaporate and now become a rental, a regular rental. So there are so many injustices that we cannot tackle in our community. I think the best thing, if anybody can read the statements of the community board, one of the first issues they raised right there is affordable housing. And in our community, we don't pay attention in that direction. And we are seeing that the developers, what they're doing is demolishing all the affordable housing to bring luxury housing, which basically I'm not opposed to build luxury housing, by the way. The only thing is they try to remove all the minorities and put outside of our community and create a bigger disparity by income in our community. Indeed, I did a survey that in 12 developments, for every affordable new housing that is created, 17.26 is demolished. So it's right there. We don't need to create no programs, no special groups. It's right there. We can see every single day. And I has been mentioned all the time, the same numbers. And apparently I'm talking to the air sometimes, because it should be an alarming for all of us that in this case it should be for the minority, and that's included all the races in that part, because those people that have less fortune, they have less possibility to have a decent and honest site or house to live. And I think that is wrong. And I think we can do something better what they doing in 92nd Street development. And I think it's completely outrageous how they throw the money from FEMA to destroy the last chance to create affordable housing, because in our community we don't have a single lot to build affordable housing unless you're willing to pay Adam Wall. He told me that yes, there is a lot available in our community. $90 million for 188,000 square feet. So basically, to create affordable housing in our community is zero for the minorities. The only chance we have is to increase affordable housing in those underdevelopment sites, such as Isaac and Holmes Tower. This is the only place, and this place also is in jeopardy. Sooner or later will come a very strong weather condition, and they will be sucked or create other kind of problems. And these problems in that situation, maybe they put in the street 536 families with children because they don't know where they go and where they're gonna be. So the issue is right there. The statement said affordable housing is the main issue. So let's go tackle the affordable housing. Yes, I do have a program, by the way, because this is what I mentioned in that direction. Thank you.
Oh, Marco, you know that we are trying with height limits to get special districts to protect the tenements, and we're doing some work to try and figure out how many affordable housing units we've lost, and that we are always asking the city for affordable housing and have been, as you pointed out, ignored. And that is a huge root of a problem, is to not have enough of that. You're absolutely right, but it's not something that we've ignored. It's something that I believe the city has ignored, that we've been asking for and pushing for. And as you point out, a lot of the city and state policies are very beneficial, and as Rita pointed out, are very beneficial to certain developers and not to the communities. I see Peter has raised his hand. Will?
Yeah, I'd just like to say very briefly, I mean, I endorse and support just about all the comments, and we've only begun the conversation. Certainly housing is fundamental, education is fundamental, availability of jobs is fundamental, criminal justice is fundamental, although that doesn't impact our community as much because we're mostly white. But there's no more unjust part of our society, I believe, than our justice system, so-called. And so I'm simply going to say, if this is just conversations for tonight, it's going to evaporate. So I definitely endorse the idea of having some kind of, ongoing task force to look at this more holistically. Thank you.
Thank you. Brett?
You cut out for a second. Who were you? Alita? Alita, we lost your sound.
Sorry, Greg and Barbara Rudder.
Okay. In that order?
Sorry.
So this is Greg. I'll just jump in very quickly to say, I think that this conversation has been useful and thoughtful. I also think during the course of this conversation, there have been a few moments of times when we might benefit, when it's clear that we might have benefited from implicit bias training. There's been some maybe microaggressions in some of the comments that folks have made specific to people and people of color. And I just want to sort of flag that to say, as a listener, during the course of this dialogue in and of itself, while constructive and I think thoughtful, there have been a few moments where I think just amongst ourselves, we have some serious learning to do in terms of how we think about Black and brown folks in particular. But I just think, I just want to sort of flag that and identify it without getting into any specifics. I think this conversation of itself demonstrated a need for some additional training and reflection in terms of how we speak and how we think about racism, how we think about race, ethnicity, et cetera.
Thank you. Barbara?
Unmuted.
Barbara Rudder?
Yes. I I agree with everything that's said, but I will say I've been on lots of Zooms about this. And spoken. I do read books with it. I strongly suggest Between the World and Me. Coates is just the most enlightening book. And I think Sarah Chu knows my feeling about Just Mercy with Brian Stevenson, that would bring tears to your eyes and so on. But I'm afraid that our community board, I don't want it to be personal. So I'm trying to be very careful, and I've thought of it, but I think we have very good words, and I think we don't necessarily follow through. And what's brought great emotion on a couple of different levels about the protests that are going on is how successful it is and how laws are changing. I do not believe that we'll make any real progress until laws change, and that may be uncomfortable for us. So yes, it's housing, which may mean that we have more integrated housing. Yes, it's health, which means that some of our taxes may go up to either have universal health care or more support of other types of hospitals and so on. Yes, it's jobs. It may mean that we want the minimum wage to go up. That will be uncomfortable. And I have quite truthfully sat here sometime, and I may be guilty also. I'm certainly far from pure, but where if it's not convenient, we argue against it. We all have wonderful words, and I think we all mean it. So I agree with the task force, but I would love it to go on a more granular level. I'd like to repeat again, I would like to meet with plan on writing to my committee tomorrow to say, what can we send as ideas? Certainly health, even maternal health, what's there, different services that are not given as well. Food insecurity, that is more of, it's poor generally, but the poor usually means it. And we need something more granular than just a task force. Robert Fullylove, I was at the meeting that I held, and then again is somebody, if you look at his YouTube, talks about the history of why there was such discrimination. So we can all be enlightened, but until we do something more than that and change laws and say, yes, we are going to provide good health. I'm sorry, but I know that others are focused on housing. I focus on health. Until we do more than that, I think it's won't get more than nice words. And I think we as a community, I always felt that one of our powers of a community board is to convince our electeds to change the laws or enhance the laws and to listen to what we said. And we have been successful to some degree. So I hope we go beyond a task force, and I hope that the committees, and I hope it's okay if I work on my committee, not instead of a task force, but ideas that I have been mulling over for a long time and working on for a long time and going to lots of meetings, social justice, environment, as I said, these are just such major topics that unless laws are changed, it wasn't until, if you read that book, What Your Eyes Don't See, it wasn't until Flint changed laws that their water got better. But meanwhile, the Black and brown children have had a couple of years of drinking lead in their formula. And we need to change this and understand it more than feel good type of things. And for Mrs. Brown, when you said, if you don't take part, I wish I could have taken part in those. I'm too scared to take part of the protests. I just feel I'm too vulnerable and I didn't take part, but my kudos for every single person that went out and protested and got something amazing done, and changes will be made. I wish it was me. 20 years ago, it was me. So.
Well, just sure, write your mission statement for your committee, do the work, talk to people about it. Am I muted? No, talk to the people about it, Barbara. And the goal is definitely to try and invoke some kind of change at various levels and as much as we can. Billy?
Okay. I wanted to propose a resolution that if one is appropriate and necessary, to create a task force on this board to address these issues. But I want to, before Alita, you jump in, I do want to say, I don't want to step on the toes of the committees. I think we should empower the committees to take on these issues with their expertise. What I'd like to do is borrow an idea that Rebecca Lamort mentioned, which is that this task force should be made up of representation from the various committees to make sure that the expertise and what those committees is working on is being reflected. But I do think we need somebody that brings together all of these areas because they do intersect. You can't talk about transportation and not talk about housing. You can't talk about policing and not talk about cops in our schools. You can't have those conversations separate. So I think we should have a body that brings all this work together, and with, I think, an end product is what I put in this resolution, an end product of effectively a sort of a district report, community district report on systemic racism and racial injustice in Community District 8. So I'd like to propose that resolution and see if anyone will second it.
Billy, we don't need, how can we have a resolution to the board asking the board to do something that the resolution is saying? We don't need a resolution to create a committee or create a task force or ask the committees to do any of the things that we've talked about tonight. So I don't really understand.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we do something, that this conversation doesn't end here. I don't think it has to be a resolution. If it's a wave of the hand and boom, a task force is committed.
There certainly seems to be enough sentiment to be able to move in that direction and do something like that. So I just, I don't know, but let's see what Sharon has to say. Sharon?
I'm sorry. But I was just seconding Billy's resolution. However, I do understand that we may not necessarily need one, but I agree with Billy's sentiments that we should not conclude this discussion without having some type of framework in place. So we don't necessarily have we don't have to have a resolution. You know, it's fine by me, but as long as we have some clear next steps, I'm good with that. Are you good with that, Billy?
I see a thumb up. I don't know if you can see him, but he's raising his thumb up.
Yeah,
okay.
I saw it.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I'm okay. I think it's great. Thank you, Sharon.
Wilma?
I really like the idea that Billy brought forth about a task force. I think we should maybe allow the committee to work a little on doing some things first before a task force, because a task force is a smaller amount of people and they don't meet as much. And the committees would allow a lot more people to gather information and throw back and forth thoughts, and then eventually a task force can be used all those ideas that the committees came up with and work with that on another level.
Well, I'm not sure what all the differences are, but the goal is to have develop better understandings, better mechanisms, better routes, and to be able to create some force for change.
And that would be done in all committees.
Yes, and to be able to make and to be able on all committees for the local issues. And if you're talking about the systemic racism, lack of social justice, then something that could look at that in a broader way. There's certainly been a lot of ideas raised and a lot of things that we should all be thinking about. So we should be thinking about them. Stores, recognizing stores, supporting stores. I'm not so sure that I agree it's a low bar. I think it's not the bar, but it's more like spokes of a wheel. that feels like we should be doing things to support people individually, because that is a means to certain changes in their lives, perhaps. And I think we should be doing a lot on a local level, on a borough level, on every level. And of course, our impact changes depending on what we're doing, and judging by the abundance of hands, I'm probably saying the wrong things, but there's lots of stuff to think about and absorb, and to try and really create an opportunity and a means for change. So that's all I could say. Let's go to Mrs. Brown. Lorraine, Will, did you unmute her? Yes,
She's unmuted.
Lorraine, you're unmuted.
This is Mrs. Brown. I was just unmuted. Thank you. I believe I'm the oldest person on this board. I'm 88 years old. I sat on counters in the 50s and 60s in the South, part of the freedom riders, freedom fighters. I've gone to jail, I've been hosed, I've been beaten for civil rights, fair housing, voter suppression. And so when I hear comments from a fellow board member referring to some of the comments that were expressed by the people this evening as microaggressive, I take exception to that, where they're confused with passion. And therefore, I suggest strongly that everyone look up the word racism and do that self-audit. And these types of comments fall under that umbrella. We have to do, I'm sorry, was somebody commenting?
That was just me. I'm sorry. I thought I had finished, but go right ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting.
I took a breath. Thank you. I think at this point, Alita, I will allow you to make your comment and ask Will to keep the mic open should I need to respond. Thank you.
No, Lorraine, I'm so sorry for having interrupted you. Please continue.
Were you not going to share something with the board?
It's not. I heard the comment differently, but I want you to speak, because I wasn't the one who said it. It was just it's really silly for me to continue. So you go right ahead, please.
I think at this point we've all said enough, and I don't need to respond to anything anymore. Everybody has his or her own interpretation, but once again, it's about doing the work. It's about the self-audit, where it places us at a point of discomfort. We have to start there. That's critical. Thank you.
Well, wait, before you go, I know that you talk about doing the work. I'd like to know what you think, avenues that you think we should be going down, or the work that you think we should be doing. And that's not to say that you need to respond now, but I would like to hear what you're saying about that.
I will be more than happy to send to you my plan, my strategy, because I'm at a point or stage in my life where hope is just a tease. I feel that it's used, that it's designed to prevent us from accepting reality. So now I think in terms of strategizing and planning. So I will send to you a plan or strategies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Billy? but I think I feel like I cut you off again, and I'm sorry. Billy?
Well, no, I want to first thank Mrs. Brown for sharing what she just shared, and I hope whatever we do next, is informed in part by, the strategies, the ideas of Mrs. Brown and others on this board. I take to heart what Jack said, because I think for many of us, there's always this tension about, the balance between trying to lead and trying to listen. I think we all ought to be doing a lot of listening. But the one thing I want to communicate is I feel very strongly that we could very easily leave this meeting and have no real plan for what to do next. And if we just give it to the committees, I'm worried that there will be no structure to what the committees are doing. One committee is going to come up with something detailed and thoughtful. Another committee maybe just does something at a surface level. So what I think we can do going forward is have it, if we do have a task force informed by the ideas and strategies of members of this community board, that task force could then begin to lay out what each committee should be tasked with. And that will actually give us a structure and a direction going forward and some deadlines and expectations. And last year, 2 years ago, we had a charter revision task force that met in August. And so, I don't know about others. I feel there's a fierce urgency to these issues. And I think if people were up for it, having this task force begin to preliminarily meet even in August to discuss these issues so that we can give something to the committees when they resume in September, I think that would be appropriate. So I just wanted to put that on the table because I think we could very well leave this meeting without a direction. And I want to make sure that we've got some sense of where we're going as a board on these important issues.
Wilma?
I would love to, and would passionate about hearing Ms. Brown's strategy. I am very sensitive to what she said and the history that she spoke about. And I feel that I would love to talk to her or try to find out these strategies. I don't want to wait till September, October, December. I want to meet with her tomorrow. As far as the task force, Billy, I think it's a very good idea what you're talking about. I think that whatever things that you have to say about how you want to do this or why you want it right away, I think it should be done right away, Billy. I don't think you should wait till somebody votes on it to do it. There's things that you can do without having a task force. But I am extremely can't wait to hear what Ms. Brown has to say. Because it was very sensitive of the things that she said, and I really feel what she was talking about. And I just think that I could be helpful on the task force, or I could be helpful to understanding where Ms. Brown was coming from, on how I can share my ideas with people of the things that I would like to see done or have done. And, I just think that it's a good time for us to work together and try to figure out something. And I don't think it's a lost cause, which is said tonight in a lot of different ways. And we should just start talking to each other and try to meet and work out something moving forward.
Yes, we should move forward. And maybe what the material that Lorraine Brown is preparing could be prepared or sent in a way that it could be distributed to the board members. Sarah? I'm sorry, did someone, Lorraine, was that you who started to say something, or you're muted, I guess? Was someone else wanting to say something who's not muted? Wilma, was that you? No? All right.
No.
Sarah? Oh. Wilma?
I just think the board, she should adjourn soon because it's really getting late and we have a lot to think about.
Okay, well, there are two other people who have raised their hands, so Sarah and Craig. Sarah?
Hi.
You're unmuted. Hi.
Since we're talking about next steps, I'd like to suggest that, just echoing what a number of my colleagues have said, that the task force integrates people from the community, affected communities and community leaders, because they would be our advisors on how to move forward, and that that's part of doing that listening, and these advisors can help enable us as we move forward and put plans into action, and that maybe this task force can also develop plans on how we can on what we can do, what resources we might have to build on and do the work that Mrs. Brown was talking about. And so it could be a strategy for us internally in terms of our development, and it could be a strategy for how we move through the work that we're doing through the committees. Thanks.
Thank you. Craig?
Hi again. So I'm thinking about how we can formulate a pathway forward and be able to hopefully move on even tonight. So my thought is, as I mentioned earlier, I think a task force would be very beneficial on a local level, and if we can get something started right away, that would be great. But especially considering the interest in having this be more broad-based and reaching all the different committees, I guess my thought is, if we can have a dual hybrid approach, whatever you want to call it, where we have a task force that starts to think about these issues immediately. And I don't know if we have a land use meeting scheduled for September, but if we don't, to devote that second Wednesday of the month, or whatever Wednesday it is, I know it's a little weird with Labor Day in September, but to have a meeting that is entirely focused on this, where each committee presents a 5 or 10-minute report on the issues that they identify, and hopefully at that point a task force will have also identified and gone through the list for each committee and brainstormed as to what they view as potential issues as well, so we can then come together, have that all laid out, where we hopefully have a common understanding of the issues that are at hand for each committee that the task force can then move forward with, and we can come up with strategies as to how to address them beyond September. This way we're taking immediate action, we have homework that we're doing, and we're getting the process started, but we're still including everyone and not at the expense of certain committees that may otherwise get left behind.
Okay. Before I go to Marco, it's 9:40, and anyone who wants to leave, this is not required. So the people who stay are obviously welcome, and we could continue talking about this, but for anyone who would like to leave, as I said, it's not a required board meeting. Marco?
Thank you. I think Craig, he is, I don't know if I'm on. Is Craig or me?
You are.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I think Craig, he raised a very good point. Each committee has its own expertise, and no extra committee can create another way of thinking or lay out the general guidelines. It means each committee has its own specialty, and they are the best people. They can come in with some ideas, and they put it on the table. Let me raise another issue that last year about the Charter Commission. For me, with all respect, that was a joke, because already was set the guidelines established, and we were just only discussing without no sense. We reach a conclusion in none of of our recommendation reach the real point. So let's go stop bureaucracy. Let's go stop and let each committee work by themselves and come with some proposal. And from there, we can move forward, because each committee has some specialty, and no better than them can do anybody else. And I think I strongly recommend it should be each committee come in with some ideas, whatever it is, and present it to us, and then we can discuss. Each committee offer an idea exactly how they perceive to tackle this issue. That is my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so anyone who's interested in being on the task force should email me. I'd like to ask the committees, as people have suggested, to come up with a plan to look at, to tackle the issues pertaining to the committee that relate to social justice, racial inequalities in the community. And then we'll organize a task force and have it take us down roads that we should be looking at and should be thinking of, that may be hybrids with committees, maybe beyond the committee scope as we've seen it right now, and will help address, and maybe part of it is education or resources or learning or inner exploration opportunities for board members or members of the community. And if you have ideas about other people who either can advise or could be on the task force, then please email those suggestions as well. Because the time is ripe, and we are leaders in the community and in the borough and in the city, and we should be doing something or many things. So, for Lorraine Brown, please, obviously there's a lot of interest in your ideas, and for anyone else, there is as well. Collaboration is critical, I've always thought. So let's, I know I'm just thinking as I'm speaking, which is always not necessarily a good idea, but let's see how much we can accomplish in a thoughtful manner. So thank you, everyone. And is there anyone else who would like to say anything before we finish? Okay, I don't see, oh, Rebecca Dangor.
I appreciate everything that's been said, and this might be kind of nitpicky, but I would prefer it to be its own committee than a task force. The task force, it seems to suggest the time is kind of limited, and this issue isn't going away. But I'm happy that we're taking action. Thank you.
Okay, Wilma.
Agree with that too. I agree with that. I really think that at this time, not a task force. I think there's going to be a lot of work to be done in the committees, and I think we should do that for now, and maybe a task force in the near future, but not now.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Then let's leave by thinking. Oh, Sharon.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I agree with Rebecca.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, well, let's leave with thinking about this, and email with your inclination to be a part of this and ideas that you have for other extra beyond the community board membership, advisors, or membership. And something will be structured and organized, and we'll be able to move forward. Okay? Okay. Well, thank you. I know you've had a lot of really good ideas, a lot of interesting suggestions. So I'm always ears for everything. You guys are all thoughtful and concerned about doing the right thing. So we'll see each other next week, right, at the full board meeting.
Motion to adjourn from someone?
Motion? Rebecca, second?
I saw Ed and Vanessa.
I don't see them, but I'll take your word for
They
it.
have thumbs
Okay.
up. I see them.
Okay. So meeting is adjourned, and thank you. Have a good week. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye.